All right, guys, we got new limited edition apparel. There's 2 designs, as with all the limited edition apparel. It's only while supplies last. This is the Blue Illusion tee, so I guess you can act like you're stronger than you really are. It's an illusion. And the other one, work harder, not lazier, or you could just work really, really hard at being lazy. Doesn't matter to me. All that matters to me is that you support the podcast. So hit the link in the description or go to elitefts.com, and on the homepage, scroll down, you're going to see limited edition apparel. Click on there. Pick up your limited edition apparel today. Help support the podcast. Thank you. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. My guest again is Matt Wenning. This is probably like episode 465 that I've had with Matt. Yeah. So no need for introductions. We'll just kind of jump straight into this. I saw on your YouTube channel, it's a great video, by the way. I think I sent you a text about that, yeah, about your Cabo trip and the stem cells and so forth. So what led to that?
Well, so about August time, I went to the doc, and he was telling me that my B vitamins and my vitamin D level was low. My testosterone came back at like 980, which is high natural. So, and I've been there for over a decade. So, a lot of it was to go back and get my testosterone renewal, but I wanted to run a full blood panel because I just felt like I was in my early mid 40s and I was starting to just feel tired, you know? And so Serrano tells me that my vitamin B and my D levels are low. And I thought that was odd because I was eating red meat like 4 times a day. And so I send the blood work to Dr. Jackson, and he's the guy that does Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman and all those guys for their diets for the MCU movies. And he tells me, hey, you need to go see a kidney doctor like, you know, now, just because I see some stuff in this that I don't like. And he had a kidney transplant due to frying his shit from heavy lifting for many years. So I go to the kidney doctor, and he's pretty calm compared to Dr. Jackson. And he's like, well, I want you to go easy on your training for 5 days. Like, and let's retest this and see, because when I went to Serrano, I was fasting, but I had been training the day before.
Yeah.
So my creatinine levels were like stupid high, like 3,000 high, like 300 is high.
Yeah,
normal.
So, yeah, real.
Mine
high.
was like 3,000. I take 5 days off, and it's like at 800. And I'm thinking, well, okay, that's decent. But my ferritin levels and my iron was high in my blood. And I thought that made sense from eating red meat 4 or 5 times a day for the last 6 or 8 years. You kind of remember about 2018 when I started to lean out and hang out with Stan Efforting, I was eating pure vertical, and I got down to like a 36-inch waist at like 280 body weight. And long story short, I just got used to eating that way. And so I was eating beef and rice with a little bit of vegetables, you know, a cheat meal maybe every 5 days. So they send me to the kidney doctor, and they have me drop my training down. And next thing I know, my creatinine levels are normal, but my ferritin level doesn't change. And my EGFR, which is your glomerular flow rate, which is how well your kidneys are filtering, was like in the 30s, and it's supposed to be above 59. And I'm thinking, son of a bitch, right? So I go to the doctor and I ask him, I go, is this because of anabolics? Because I trained drug-free until I was about 24. And then when I moved over here full time, about 05 is when I started to get on TRT. I had actually went to a endocrinologist at about 20, right when I turned 24. I had squatted 903 drug-free. I benched like close to like 625 in a shirt drug-free, and then pulled like 722. But I was starting to where I was just fatigued all the time. And so the endocrinologist back then does a blood panel on me, and my testosterone's like 310 at 23. And I said, well, why is my testosterone level so low? He goes, well, it could be could be genetics, or because of my leg fractures. When I broke my legs as a kid, they used a lot of different anesthesia to put me out.
Mhm.
And they said that could have affected it as well with the 3 leg surgeries that I had. So they didn't really know it. And the genetics could have been from my dad being exposed to Agent Orange. So a lot of people don't know this, but my sister was born with her heart backwards. So the pulmonary side pumps the body, which is low pressure, and the body side that's supposed to be the strong side that pumps her whole body pumps her lungs, which makes her lungs hypertensive. So her heart is basically backwards. They
Mhm.
can't fix it because if you put a regular heart in, none of the pipes line up,
Yeah.
right? So she would need like a heart, liver, and lung transplant all in one rip, and nobody survived that,
Mhm.
not for very long. So she's still alive and she's 40, but that's what my sister got from my dad being exposed to Agent Orange. My brother got the eye issues. So he was born, his eyes were really trash. They had to go through like 3 or 4 eye surgeries. Mine could have been a kidney issue that happened. And not that I didn't promote it
Yeah.
from lifting stupid fucking weights for 30 years.
Mhm.
They could have promoted it, but the doctor said you could have had this happen at 60 instead of 44 if
Yeah.
you wouldn't have lifted weights.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of down on my luck. I talked to the kidney doc. He goes, go off of everything, all supplements, testosterone. Let's get a baseline. I do that, and some numbers get better, and other numbers just stay the same. So as of last week, they put me back on TRT, which for me is 3/4 of a cc a week, and we'll see what happens. But what's funny was I went back in for my initial blood work again about 2 weeks ago, and my testosterone was 65, and I was still training hard.
Mhm.
I felt tired all the time, but I was still pushing through the workouts. And I noticed that it didn't really affect my strength much. I mean, you see me posting
Mhm.
constantly on Instagram. The weights aren't the same as when I was 37, but they're not much different than when I was 42.
Yeah.
And so I started to really wonder if I even needed to be back on it. But my body had gotten used to it over 20 years of my hematocrit, hemoglobin, all that was low because it was higher on testosterone. It was still in the normal range, but it was higher. Now it's below normal. So they want me back on all of it just basically because my body's adapted to it.
Mhm.
So I've been on testosterone now for 1 week. I took my first shot on Saturday.
Mhm. So how did that lead to the stem cells?
Well, so I was kind of down on my luck, and the doctors were like, "We need to get your sodium in check," because obviously I was eating pretty clean, but my sodium was high. So I dropped my sodium down. I stopped eating as much red meat all the time. I was down to eating red meat like every 3 days versus like 4 times a day. So that changed. Well, I'm at Swiss, into 23, and Dr. Khan is there as a stem cell guy. And I start talking to Eddie because he'd had kidney issues. And I was like, he goes, you need to go talk to Dr. Khan. I'm sure they can do something about that with stem cells. So not knowing a ton about it other than some of the small shit that I've read on the internet, I start talking to him and he's like, yeah, we can go through your femoral artery into your renal arteries, inject stem cells directly into the kidney, and it'll stop the process and it'll also gain back some function. So I'm like, well, fuck it. At this point, I'm like, might as well give it a whirl, even though it's expensive. So I flew down to Cabo and met Dr. Khan, and they did the surgery. It took about 35 minutes. So what they did was they ran a catheter through my femoral artery into my renal artery. Then they ballooned the catheter to where there was not a lot of blood flow into the kidney for about 5 to 8 minutes, and then injected the stem cells into the kidney and forced it to stay in the area for 10 minutes each. So it has to bond. So from what I've read and what I've seen is you have to get embryonic stem cells for it to help heal organs. And also stem cells are kind of like a repairing cell that doesn't really have a steering wheel. It doesn't really know where to go. It has to be forced into the area, right? Like you can't just put it in your vein and it'll help your knee.
Yeah.
It will a little, but not directly as much. So they can do that now with organs. There was actually a girl in there that was going in after me. It was having it injected into her brain because she had cerebral palsy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, shit. And the next week, like Goldie Hawn was down there, So for me, it was a decent gamble. They say it'll take upwards of 6 months to start seeing some full regeneration because organs don't respond as fast.
And what will be the metric to know that?
The metric will be the EGFR number. So if my EGFR goes back into the normal range, which right now it's at like stage 2 kidney disease, if it goes back up to stage 0, which would be like above 60, then we did what was supposed to be done. But it was funny because my whole life, I trained so hard to make sure that my knees were good and my back was good and my elbows and my shoulders with no thought process on, hey, I'm fucking doing damage to my organs.
Mhm.
And the doctor was like, this is the first time we've seen this happen at this level. Well, I was in an experimental study about 20 into 13 or 14 when Dr. Kramer was still at Ohio State. They put a blood pressure monitor on me when I was squatting, and I worked my way up to 800. And the world record was 832 at the time. And my top and bottom number was over 600 combined. So it was like 300 over 300 was my blood pressure squatting those heavy weights. So for people that say, oh, you know, it's from anabolics, I'm like, I never took a lot of anabolics.
Mhm.
But what I did do is I never stopped working out.
Mhm.
So I would hit a world record, and in 3 days, I was back in the gym. Now, maybe not doing world record type training, but I never gave my body a break because I thought, well, my joints feel good
Mhm.
because I was training smart. So my area of thinking that I was doing stuff smart was the fact that my joints were great. I mean, I've never came to you and complained of my knee or my
No,
back
yeah,
or anything, you know? So that was kind of my metric of measurement that, hey, your training's really smart. But looking back now, probably once I got elite at about 26 years old, I probably should have took a solid 2 to 3 weeks down after every competition, especially when we were training at Louis, because there was no downtime, you know, as well as I do.
Yeah.
Like you try to take downtime and you're on the clock to getting kicked out.
Mhm.
When in reality, we probably should have after those monster meets. Like,
Would that allow the kidney to regenerate though?
I think so. I think it would allow my blood pressure to come down
Yeah,
enough at the
yeah.
time of my age that it would have allowed some healing.
Yes.
So when you and I were in our prime and squatting our asses off and
Yeah.
blowing shit off in our eyeballs and our nose, we were doing the same shit around our organs.
Yeah.
just
So,
couldn't see
So at the
it.
very least, the blood pressure is not as high for certain periods of time.
Because what was weird was when I initially went into the kidney doc and he took my blood pressure, I was like 266 and it was like 130 over like 84. It wasn't horrible,
Mhm.
you know, but the problem was I was spiking the fuck out of it 4 times a week. So I'd
Mhm.
go in and do max effort every Saturday, max effort upper every Sunday, dynamics every Tuesday and Wednesday. And, you know, those are still at maximum intent.
Mhm.
So your blood pressure is still going up. So right when I would do like Wednesday, I'd get done with dynamic uppers. I would have 2 days off of training before Saturday. And on Friday, everything was back to normal. And then I'd smack it right back in the ass on a Saturday and a Sunday.
Mhm.
And then Monday I'd have off and it'd probably come right back down to normal. And then I'd smack it again. So it just stayed elevated due to the training. And it was funny because when I trained heavy, I took my blood pressure the next day and it was still slightly elevated because it's trying to recover. So a lot of times what your body does to adjust for recovery and training doesn't necessarily put your organs in the best environment to recover.
Yeah.
So when you get elite and you get insanely strong, you have to be careful that not only your training is smart, but your downtime is also smart. So I would say that would be one of my biggest downfalls was that I stayed healthy enough that I could train hard with no backdowns.
Yeah.
I would say from 1992 to 2018, I have less than 2 months off of training combined. Like 2 months out of how many years?
Yeah.
Like 27 years of competing. And I look at it now and I'm like, what a fucking idiot. But you know, when you're in it, you're like, I'm not going to lose what I've already gained. You know, I'm not going to back down.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you can't get out of that mindset. The psychoticness of what makes you get to that strong will not let you come back down to average
Yeah.
in my mind.
Well, I'm thinking more of what the damage would have been had the blood pressure always been high. Like
Yeah.
your blood pressure was more stable, but say,
Yeah.
because we know many, right, that their blood pressure is always high,
Mm-hmm.
which now when they're training and they're under those heavier loads, it's higher,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's, they're fucked.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Yeah, they say that a lot of people will get, like guys like us, will get massive heart attacks, and it's actually your kidneys. It's not your heart. Your potassium starts to be imbalanced through kidney regulation, and then it causes a massive heart attack. And a lot of people think it's a heart problem, but in all reality, it was your kidneys pissed 10 years
Yeah.
prior, and it finally just said, "Fuck it, I'm not controlling these electrolytes anymore," and you get a massive heart attack. So what I started to notice too is my potassium every 3 or 4 months was just kicking up just a little bit. It wasn't out of the range, but it was starting to climb. And as soon as they put me on a really low dose of lisinopril, 10 milligrams a day, my potassium dropped like 1 fucking point. So I was itching my way to a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I still train hard. But the point being is like, once your potassium level starts to go out of whack, it's going to throw your heart into a serious problem.
Yeah.
And that comes from your kidneys.
Mm-hmm.
So, you live and you learn a little bit. Luckily, I caught it in time, but I couldn't be satisfied with just replacing B and D vitamins like what Doc was saying. I had to go to a kidney specialist, and he was like, look, you're here, here, and here. This is what needs to go on. And I asked the kidney doctor, like, what do you think about these stem cells? Because they're still fairly new for organ regeneration. And he said, they're not FDA legal in America, but here's some studies from like Harvard, Yale that show some promising results. So I said, this is my idea. What do you think? And he's like, I can't tell you yes or no. And he's going like,
Yeah.
he's like, if you got the funds, do it. So we've noticed since then it's stabilized, that nothing's getting any worse. Some things are getting a little better. And Dr. Khan said it could take 6 months to see full improvement of what they're capable of doing.
So how have you changed your training now?
No, I haven't. Other than I basically base everything off technical max now instead of like full blown absolute max. So like if I feel that, I just let my body direct me to what it wants to do. It's like, say Saturday, I go into squat or deadlift, I will go up as far as my body feels like it wants to do, and then I just cut it loose. I don't try to push past that. And I was kind of ready for that stage anyway. I mean, you'd seen me for years.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the fucking moon for how long? I mean,
Well, define that a little bit more, because you're auto-regulating it, but you always did.
Yeah.
But now it's at a different level that it's being done.
So now I'd say I truly feel like an RPE of 9 versus like 92%, which is a qualification of your 1 rep max. I have no conception of what my max is anymore, other than I let my body do what it wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of that changes day to day, but what I notice is that lisinopril, that blood pressure medicine, it kind of keeps me regulated as well, because my energy level is a little bit lower. I don't feel that like when I get in there to train. And so that kind of regulates me down as well. But, Serrano is a huge negative about blood pressure medicine, but for some reason, for me, it works really well, and I don't have a lot of side effects of it from it. So it was one of those things I probably should have been on that a little bit earlier, maybe like in my late 30s. And but you live and learn,
So if before with the max effort work, the way I'd kind of classify what you were doing is you always stayed about 1 jump away, right? So you hit the big weight, maybe you can do another one, but at what expense? The joint expense and so forth. Would you say now you're probably 2 jumps away?
Yeah, I'd say it feels like about an 8.5. Like where if there was money on the table, I could go for 2 more sets. And just save it there. And what's funny is when I want to tap into it, because of how many years I did it, it's there. I don't have to train at that level to be at that strength. Like I tapped into a 500 bench like maybe 2 months ago, and I hadn't touched anything over 365, like in true weight. And I just was like, just smoked it. And I was thinking, how much time could I have taken it easy and maintained all that strength when I thought when I went easy, I was going to lose it. And that started to really change how I was training my clientele. I built in deloads every 4th week, whether they want to deload or not. And some clients I've lost doing that. I don't feel like I need to come down. Would you fucking listen?
Yeah.
Like I've been there. I know what you're talking about, but you'll get stronger longer. And you're going to have some time down to let other things heal that you're not even thinking about.
Have you had to change any of the repetition method stuff? Say the hard sets of 10, 15.
I don't change a lot of that, but the weight, I definitely regulate the weight more. So what I do is, it's easy for me because the people I train at my facility are all different strength levels. I try to stay with the guys that would be way beneath me in a pre or competition mode back in 38.
Yeah.
I try to stay at those guys' weights and just push a little bit more reps. So like, I'll give you an example. Sunday we had incline dumbbells. So I go to hundreds and I do like 20 after max effort, 2 sets. And those other guys get like 13, 12, so I just maintain the weight that they use and I just don't go any farther than that. And those guys bench like 405.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a stupid way to regulate it, but that's kind of how I do it. I just see kind of where are guys at that are benching around 400 and let me just beat them on their reps, but not go to like 150s and try to get like 10 or 12.
Well, on those 20s, is that, 5 RPE or I mean 5 reps in reserve, or is it
That's
all the way?
pretty close to
Okay.
toast. Yeah. I mean, I would say it's probably a good 9.
Okay.
Yeah. I have maybe 1 or 2 left. I don't ever really push until I'd completely die anymore.
Yeah.
Where I used to go until complete failure on a lot of the accessory work. Now I probably got 1 or 2 in the tank.
So where do you think the blood pressure is when you get to those final reps?
It feels weird because on that lisinopril, when I'm pushing through it hard, I feel like my lungs are full of like the lactic acid won't go away. So, like those Wenning Warmups, how they're real fast. I'll notice with like 20% less weight than I used to use that I'm burning like a fucking madman.
Mm-hmm.
But I keep the rest periods low because that's what I'm trying to do is build work capacity with that. You're fixing weaknesses, but you're reducing the ability to. It's a recovery type deal. You're trying to get the muscles to fire what you want to fire. So if I have a tricep lat weakness, which is 95% of people listen to this, is why it's regulating your bench. I'm trying to get those areas activated, but I'm doing it in a GPP or a conditioning sense.
Mm-hmm.
Then I can rest 5 minutes and start my max effort work, and I'm still done in an hour. But I noticed that less weight burns much worse now just on that blood pressure medicine. Because I think my body was increasing the blood pressure to help pump that filtration system faster.
Yeah.
It was just crazy watching my creatinine drop like 2,500 points in 5 days. So when people see, he's like, dude, you basically have lived in rhabdo for like 20 years and your kidneys are just like, we've had enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, some of that could be contested a little bit to the warm-ups, but nobody was using the weights that I was using. You know what I mean? I was warming up I remember right before I got sick, I was doing 4 sets of 40 with 225 and then maxing on the bench. I mean, who's going to do that kind of volume?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Maybe 5 people in the world could do that. So it's one of those things where it just kind of humanizes you a little bit. You start realizing, okay, I'm fucking human,
Yeah.
But it's at that age too. I'll be 45 this year. My dad passed away at 43. So I've already outlived him. Now he was a smoker and exposed to Agent Orange and all that. But yeah, it's just now it's more about the longevity. I love training. Even when I was competing, if I had to give up all of my accomplishments just to be able to still work out, I'd do it in a heartbeat because I like the process more than the outcome, which I think is the problem that we have in powerlifting today is everybody wants to look at that. What's my competitive number? Like when I ask you how much I bench, I want that one number. But in reality, if you start thinking about how long you can train, that number goes up automatically, but it doesn't in a positive fashion. Because how long you can get PRs, and you and I both know this, is a limited amount of time. You're going to be from like 16 to maybe 40 if you're real smart. And then you're going to have to start basing it on a different scale.
Yeah.
Just because of the aging process. And that's taking drugs or not. Doesn't matter.
Well, I think with what you're talking about is, the delayed gratification with everybody bitches about now is what I see with a lot of lifters. And here's what I don't know. I don't know if it's any different than when you were coming up or when I was coming up. It's the same thing. Everybody wants to, get as strong as they and as fast as they possibly can. But I think where the difference might lie is the aspirations might have been a little different, where when we're teenagers, our aspirations are, man, I'd really love to get to the nationals, but that qualifying total is like 500 pounds away.
Yeah.
But that was still the aspiration, which you knew it was going to take. Like this is going to take years to be able to do that. And that still out there is that aspirational goal, but then you're chipping away at all the other things. And now if you remove that and I just want to bench more, then I think it changes the way they mentally go into all the training and everything else.
Yeah. And the thing of it is, honestly, I mean, think about it when we were coming up, if you wanted to compare yourself to other people, you had to wait once a year for PLUSA to come out with the top 50 list or the top 100 list. That was the only time you could compare. Now you can have it in a heartbeat on the internet. So that comparison point, I think in some ways is a negative for a lot of people because they want to look at the top guy, but they don't want to necessarily look at how long it might have took to get those numbers. They think it's achievable if I follow an 8-week cycle or a 6-month program. In reality, that could be a decade away and you got to get to that decade and not get hurt, which is a whole nother basket of problems, right? Like, and things you have to figure out. And that's where I don't think any one training system is necessarily better than another. It's when it's applied,
Yeah.
right? Like there is a time and place for linear periodization, even though I do believe in conjugate wholeheartedly, but I only believe in conjugate if the right person is coaching you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you got somebody telling you exactly what to do and when to do it because of what they see, it's a completely different scenario than throwing somebody a conjugate system that has no conception of proper technique. And now you're going to make them do a bunch of variety
Yeah.
when they don't even know how to properly squat. I mean, I didn't get introduced into a conjugate until I was already a 600-pound squatter with perfect form with a straight bar. Then I was like, oh, there's these other types of things to go on. And it took a little bit of ego to swallow for me to go, I don't know shit, and I need to go talk to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, you saw me as a punk kid when I was 19. I bench pressed 500 in front of George Halbert at 19 years old, and the only information I got from him was your triceps are fucking garbage. And then he walked away.
Mm-hmm.
But he was testing me to see if I was a ego lifter or if I was a coachable. And so 20, 30 minutes later, I go talk to Louie and like, hey, George told me my triceps aren't very good. What do I need to do? And he shows me his rollbacks and your Tate fold ins and all this stuff. And so I go home and I don't see George for 6 months later because I go in and try to squat with Chuck. Because Sundays were hard for me because I had to be back so early to train the athletes at Ball State that the Saturday and Friday crews were easier. So I would show up and train. Well, I finally made it back to another Sunday to bench with George, and he had noticed on the back of my elbow that meat was growing on that medial head. And I had been listening to what Louie said about building triceps. And ever since then, he was an open book. And then my bench went to 600 in like 3 years from 3 years. You know what I mean? But point being is like, for me, it was always about the passion of working out. I like the camaraderie. I like the team effort. I like the atmospheres. Those were the things that drew me to the training. That's kind of what pushed me into the world records was I would emulate Chuck and look at him and go, that's the level of intensity I need to break a world record, but I also need to do it, in my opinion, smarter by backing down when I need to feel like I back down.
Yes.
Plus, I was doing so much more shit outside of just working out. I was getting a master's degree. I was building up my own business. I mean, things that are just like wrenching, as you well know.
So with that, to lean into the business part a little bit, at what point did you start laying the groundwork for the business? So there's the master's degree, but I think when people see what you do now, you know, it's the same thing with like lifting, right? It's like, oh, they don't see everything that happened beforehand and how it started and when it started to formulate. So was it while you were getting your master's that you were trying to formulate what you wanted to do?
No, honestly, it wasn't in school because, you know, you've been in higher level school too. So, you know, but like in master's degree where I was getting school, it was survival. Like we didn't have time to formulate business protocols. We were too busy studying research projects and making sure that our classes were fulfilling all the needs that we needed to get good grades because I was on a GA ship. So I was a graduate assistant. I didn't have to pay for my master's, but I also had to work 60 hours in the weight room. So for me, it was I needed to survive graduate school. And I wasn't the smartest kid in my class. My lab partner in all through school was a mathematics graduate from MIT. I was a fucking meathead. So like the reason I was in that shit was because they wanted me to make applicable science papers. Because these guys, although they were really smart, they didn't have no applied knowledge. So I was like the applied guy. I was the guy working with the athletes. I saw the problems. I saw what had been studied and what wasn't studied. And so I was the one that kind of formulated the overall picture of the study. And then all of these guys would help make the study perfect. So for me, it was survival.
Well, it was survival, but what were you working towards? Like, what did you think the career was going to be when you were done?
Like anybody else in school, I think I get a master's degree and now everybody's going to kiss my ass and I'm not going to have to work to get a job. And what I realized is that Louis like, yeah, you got to move over here. You got to move over here. So it was about a 3-hour way, you know? And so I'm like, okay, fuck it. I'll move over. So I move over and I realized that nobody gave a shit. Nobody cared that I trained at Westside other than the small crew.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody really cared I had a master's degree. So I had to start off at a Lifetime Fitness as a fucking trainer that I couldn't stand because I'm around people that are not driven.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're coming in because it's mostly ego. You know, oh, I have a trainer, but I don't really work out. So it was kind of a huge punch in the crotch, realizing that all this stuff I worked for at the time was nearly useless.
Mm-hmm.
I could have done that straight out of undergrad. And I thought maybe Louis was right. I didn't need my master's degree, which was completely wrong
Mm-hmm.
down the road. So I started to get around Louis, and I start seeing that he's selling T-shirts. He's doing things to make money outside of the gym because most people may or may not know this, but Westside was never a money maker for him. It was just a passion.
Mm-hmm.
He made money off some T-shirts and writing some articles and just, you know, basic shit. But I started to realize that he had like this little internet business, and Elite FTS was first starting to take off. And I'm like, well, Dave's selling like how-to DVDs and manuals and stuff like this. And I'm thinking, well, shit, I went to school to do all that. That's pretty simple for me, you know, the programming. And that started to get the wheels turning while I was doing this personal training shit that I couldn't stand.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, so 2 years roll by and I'm becoming pretty successful. I take JL's name off the board at Westside Barbell. So now I'm kind of one of the bigger guys in the gym. And, but then all that blew up after Chuck left, and I kind of got thrown the AM crew of what to do because I sure as hell wasn't going to let a couple of the other guys decide what we were going to do for training because they were dumber than a box of rocks.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I knew that was because I was developing the Westside certification at the time and doing all the backlogs in case like you took the test and go, well, where the hell did you get this Q&A? This doesn't make any sense. I had it referenced like for every place I got that question and answer. And the only people that passed the test was me and Louis and George in the gym. Everybody else failed. And I was thinking, man, these guys, they just come in and just do what they want. They don't understand. It was kind of an agitating scenario, but I didn't realize that at the time I was kind of just under the watchful eye of what Louis thought was right at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was no back down. We're getting too much pressure from Big Iron. We need to train in the gear all the time. And some of it was right and some of it was wrong. And I stuck to my guns because I was having talks with Zatsiorski over at Penn State. He wasn't retired yet. And then Verkashansky over in Italy through his daughter, Natalia. And they were like, well, why aren't you taking downtime every month? That's what we did on every particular Russian cycle, this. And I'm thinking, man, that's a really good idea because that's when I feel like I'm flattening out and getting worse. So I came back with an idea that we would go raw week 1, moderate gear week 2, full gear week 3, and then week 4 we would go really easy, nothing over 60%, and just wave it different ways. We go to the Iron House Classic in 2007, and my squat goes from 1,003 to 1055, like that. And I'm like, and then Greg breaks the world record in the 242 class. All the guys in the morning group just fucking killed it. But what I didn't realize it was my idea, and it wasn't Louie's idea so much. And that created some rift that I just felt when we first got there, and like you were there to a point, that if everybody got better, then we just learned.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, I felt Louis had his own mindset on what he thought worked, and anything outside of that was not going to be played with. And I didn't realize that as I was doing more research and finding more shit, I was actually just digging a bigger hole.
Mm-hmm.
So it finally comes to a head. We're getting ready we get done with the Iron House Classic in 07. Vlad finally moves in and starts to train with us. And Chuck is kicking his ass all over the gym in every lift and everything. But we go to 2008. It was like a WPO qualifier. It was here local. It was at the gym right there on the West Belt. And Vlad squats 1250 easy. And then Chuck palms out. And I wasn't standing there, so I don't know what the whole deal with that was. That's when Chuck threw the keys at Louis, and he was gone for nearly forever. And I was gone in 2 weeks. And that's when I left Louis's place and kind of got thrown out on my ass is when I realized I needed a better business plan than what I was just doing. And so that, in about 2008 is when the business formulation started to get an idea. I was originally going to go to school as a pipe fitter. I was already in the pipe fitters union when I was 19, but they wouldn't allow me to go to college and the pipe fitters union at the same time. So I had to choose, and I wanted to go, I'm going to throw all my cards at trying to be a strength coach. I can always go back to welding if I want to, because I was always pretty good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how all that started. But I had a welding background. So I started dabbling with a little bit of equipment manufacturing. And obviously it was, it was rough at the time. But after about a year, I had it pretty much dialed out to the point that I would make a prototype and then I'd have somebody else fabricate it that could do it 10 times faster than I could. And that was a part of the business that started to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I realized that I had to have more marketing than just being able to be a coach in person, because no matter how good you are, you're only good in a 20-mile radius in person.
Yeah.
So I needed this passive way.
Well, were you also trying to get out of the coaching in person as well?
No, because it was always something I was comfortable with, even though I didn't like. But I didn't like it at the time because it was like more one-on-one shit.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to create groups. And so I started to create more group atmosphere and started to realize that people were getting better, because if you have 5 people coming in and one person has a bad attitude that day, the attitude snaps right out.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's one-on-one, you absorb it.
Yeah.
You know this.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I started to create group atmosphere. And then by 2010, I opened up my own facility and I start realizing that I have all of these programs that I've written for people or other clientele that with a little bit of a modification, they could actually be a product. So we built a small website, and then as it grows, that's just kind of how it started.
Mm-hmm.
But, when I moved over here out of grad school, my old welding boss gave me an $800 check and told me good luck. And that's all I had in my checking account. That's it. I had a car that was paid off that I paid off all through grad school and $800 in my checking account, sink or swim. I had 1 month of money to make it. And that will drive you to either failure or success.
Yeah.
If I'd have came over with 50 grand, I don't know if I'd have took it as serious.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of cringe when I see people say, hey, I'm saving up money to pay for my kids' college or whatever. You need to fucking grind from 18 to 30. If you're a grinder, then nothing in this world will fuck with your...
Well, you learn a lot through that time.
Right. But if it's just handed to you, what do you learn?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. And I think we have people that we both know that have been that way, and then they end up not becoming successful. But some of the biggest things that I remember, my professors telling me was, one, how hard you work and how hard you study in your 20s is how valuable you are for the rest of your life. And I remember that sticking in my
Mm-hmm.
head. Dr. Robert Newton from Australia is the one that told me that, and that always stuck in my head. So I read, I trained, I slept, and I worked. That was it in my 20s. From 20 to 30, that was it. Even up in probably till 35. So for me, it was more of a passion thing. It wasn't a job. And once I had my own facility, I was in control of my own destiny. It was the best thing I ever had. But it started off really rough and hard. And I felt like when Louis had initially kicked me out, that I was, it was kind of like, I moved over here for what? This was
Mm-hmm.
a complete waste of time, because Eddie was knopping at the bit for me to come up to Chicago and train with him. And I was like, man, maybe I'd be better off if I was in Chicago. And I'm glad I came over here, because now we're all friends. But at that time, it was kind of like your dad threw you out on the street and,
Mm-hmm.
with nothing. And that's what it felt like at the time, just because we had a disagreement on training.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's what you're going to put in front of this? You know what I mean? So it was a weird situation at the time, but it made me grow. It definitely made me grow. And I think sometimes, maybe in some ways, he might have done that on purpose and just thought that, I was going to do better on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he was surprised when I showed up at that meet 9 months later and took the world record.
Yeah.
But I don't know that was his initial intention, because right before he died, he sent me his book and he wrote in it, I'm proud of you for all your business,
Mm-hmm.
Success and your lifting. And it was kind of one of those things. I think he was trying to say goodbye,
Mm-hmm.
and at first when I got the book, I was kind of like, man, fuck him. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But then after about 2 weeks, I was like, I need to call him and try to be cool,
Mm-hmm.
And he never called me back. And within a month or so, he had
Yeah.
passed. But I had tried to reach out to do stuff with him, or at least apologize. Not that he would have cared,
Yeah.
but I would have cared.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So yeah, it was one of those things. I think it was it was a tumultuous time to create that business, but it also gave me the tools that I needed to succeed. Because if I wouldn't have saw how Louis kind of ran Westside a little bit, I probably wouldn't be where I'm at now. If I wouldn't have saw how you ran Elite FTS and got all that stuff started, not that I know all what you did, but like it gave me at least goals of where I wanted to be.
So during that time when it's just the gym, and because there is a balance of, competitive powerlifting and the business, which is that's a different world. I mean, nobody's going to really relate to that unless they've done that. I mean, it's completely different because you kind of don't give a fuck about the business. You just want enough to be able to eat.
Well, that's what makes you successful.
Yes.
I mean, when you can tunnel vision in, and I'm not saying this to be hardcore, but like from 2007 to 2014, probably the combination of almost all my big success. There were Christmases I didn't go to. There were funerals that I missed. There were people's birthdays that I didn't go because it fell on a fucking training day. And now I look back at it and I'm like, you fried your kidneys for that? Thinking, what a fucking idiot. You know what I mean? At the time. But at the time I was doing it, I was thinking, this is what it's going to take for me to be the best, because I didn't feel like I earned the right to tell anybody else how to physically become better unless I was willing to put my balls on the chopping block and give it everything I had. Yeah,
but from the business side, the main aspiration that you have there at that time is just being able to continue to power lift.
Absolutely.
So the aspirations aren't, I want to grow this to this bigger level.
No.
So the problem that happens there is not every month is good.
Right.
So when that falls under that, then it threatens your ability to actually do the powerlifting because you can't buy food, you can't do all these other things.
So when I first moved over here, the first year I lived in an apartment I really couldn't afford because it was so close to work in Easton. So I could just literally walk to work. I didn't have to burn any gas. Try to keep it very minimalistic. Well, then Louis sold me the house that Westside Barbell initially started at in the garage off of Larkham, right? And so that house was like 60 grand. I had it paid off in like 2 years. So now it cost me $2,000 a year in property taxes to live in. My point being is you have to, if you're going to be a professional lifter, you have to find a way to keep your overhead insanely low to where you don't have a lot of financial stress, because all of your stress has to be in the training.
Yes.
There can't be business stress on top of training stress on top of family stress, and you're gonna be the best you can be, at least not in my eyes.
Well, the question would be, being a person that's been in that same place, if the business aspirations were higher, because we can look back with a different mindset than when we were in it.
Sure.
Would the lifting have suffered?
Absolutely.
Yes.
By far. And the reason is because I was tapped out with the amount of energy that I could put into anything. I mean, when I was training insanely hard, like when I squatted that 1200 in 2011, I was sleeping 12 and a half hours a day, like 8.5, 9 hours normal, and then a 2.5, 3 hour nap. That was every day, just to be able to recuperate from anything like that. I look back at it now and I'm thinking, fuck, if I'd have put that time into business, like, where would I have been sooner? But then I would have been like, I can always go and make money now if I want to. But that time I was almost smart, because I'm like, you're not going to get this age back. You're not going to get this level back. And I knew I had at least enough talent and enough work ethic that it was possible for me to be the best I could be if I could maintain that.
Well, I think the difference between yourself and many others, and there's a lot of others that have done the same type of thing that you have as well, is while it is just being done to pay the bills, it is laying a groundwork for a future that you can have, where some people, well, college is a different situation now because there's a cost benefit ratio, but let's say it didn't cost a ridiculous amount of money for an exercise science degree. If it was what it was before, they won't go because they just want to power lift, but you can still do that in between the training sessions.
Sure.
And it can build upon something later where you could have just been a bouncer. You could have, whatever the shit was, and use that for that 6 years to be able to pay the bills. But then there's no foundation. Then when you're done, you're like, oh shit, there's nothing to kind of grow them from there.
Absolutely.
So, and we've known people that have done that. We've known people that have done what you've done. They just kind of flatline, I guess would be the name. Flatline the business the best they can,
Yeah.
to be able to do what they need to do to train. But I think without even knowing it, you're still kind of laying the groundwork.
Yeah.
Because you're learning some business things
Sure.
at a little smaller scale because there's not that much revenue. But it doesn't matter if there's not that much revenue, because when you go in the red, it's the fucking red.
Yeah.
There's no food.
Well, and if there's not that much revenue, there's also not that much risk at that time.
Yeah.
So, you and I have to sit down and calculate if we want to drop $100,000 on a new product, risk value.
Yeah.
When you're doing that with a $500 product, nobody fucking cares.
Yes.
So it allows you to kind of feel the market and see what is a good gamble and what's not.
But we were kind of learning that when we were powerlifting with just the other business, because the risk value was your squat, bench, or deadlift.
Yeah.
We just didn't know that's what we were kind of learning, was how to balance and calculate that.
Sure. It's what do you have left over, kind of like your debit credit type deal for what your training is taking, expending.
Yes.
But it changes as the business grows. I remember in 2011, I switched to raw because Halbert had come to me and was like, do you want to train for a raw bench meet? I never really had any inclinations of doing that, but I could see some of the writing on the wall that Powerlifting USA was starting to show covers of more raw lifters. And I knew I was young enough to try it. And I was like, well, shit. I mean, there would only been like, I think 6 or 7 guys that had benched 600 raw at 308 at that time, like 10 RCD and like badasses, right? And I'm thinking, well, shit, I think I could try that. Because I trained raw pretty much in our max effort days. We hardly ever put gear on. So I was hitting 550, 570 with no shirt on back when I was benching like 755 in a shirt.
Yeah.
So
Let me put a little context here just for those listening.
Yeah.
This was a time when basically nobody was doing raw, right? And if you did, you were the outcast, right? So that changes the dynamic there too, because you're deciding to do something. Everybody else is like, dude, what the fuck?
Yeah. Well, think about this. Scott Weech was the guy that had the 826 world record in the squat. So I knew I had to hit, the next jump was 832. That was at Raw Unity in Florida, 2014. That squat was done, if I remember correctly, in 2002. So we're talking like 12 years ago. That's how inconsistent like the raw training was. Even the USCPL was flooded in Titan and Insert and Z suits and champion suits. And, really powerlifting hadn't been raw since the mid 80s.
Yes.
And so raw with sleeves was kind of introduced around 2013. The world record was 826. And that's what I knew I had to beat. So, it was an interesting transition, which I feel like I'm probably one of the most successful to go from geared to raw.
Well, it was also interesting to kind of watch as an outsider, because you're getting bashed for doing it.
Yeah.
But then when you break the record, the gear, like, see, we told you we were fucking strong.
Yeah.
I mean, I know.
A lot of that.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. Like, a lot of that was for all of us from the old time, I think, and I'm 10 years younger than you roughly, but my point is like, people have no conception of what we went through in the 90s and the early 2000s to hit those gear numbers. I mean, the shit that I saw Chuck and George and Nick Winters and guys do in the gym, you'll fucking never see that again. It was like stuff that was unbelievable. I remember watching Nick Winters do like 625 for a double in the bench for a training day, no shirt. And I was thinking, damn, these guys, man, like, this is unreal, It's just sad because at that time, phones weren't high quality. You couldn't record stuff as easy. You look back at the old Louis tapes of stuff that's super impressive, but the quality of the video is so bad. You don't know if it's 5 plates or 8 plates.
Well, you had to rely on your training partners to know what technique, form, breakdowns.
Yeah. So I feel bad because I think a lot of the stuff that we're seeing now, it's already been done. It just wasn't recorded as well. And so, it's interesting. But I felt like if I could take what I learned from Louis and you and all them guys, and I could push it into the raw ranks, maybe, just maybe, people would open their eyes and go, this fucking training system works for any type of strength that you're trying to do, as long as you're smart enough to wield it correctly. But that's the problem is it takes years to understand how the body accommodates to training. And most people don't have that type of patience.
At what point did the business become the higher priority than your competing training?
Oh, that's a simple 2017 as I did my last meet. I pulled my back a little bit in the squat. I had squatted, my last warm up was 75. And I wish you would have been standing there because it's the fastest I've ever seen that weight move. I mean, it was fucking bam. And as soon as I it didn't feel it when it happened, but as soon as I set the weight back into the monolift and released the pressure, that's when I felt my right side of my spine was just fucking pissed. Not bad enough that I couldn't walk or do anything, but to hit maximal numbers, I think if I wouldn't have pulled my back that day, I would have probably squatted somewhere around 925, just in sleeves. But I had to go and grind an 815 out, and I knew that my body was just fucking done. I probably should have flown out maybe about a week early, but the problem is I'm like, I'm fucking bulletproof. I flew out like a day and a half before the meet, and I just didn't notice that I wasn't ready. My body was just stiff. Because, from here to there is a fucking 4-hour flight. Yeah. It's direct. And I was stuck, at the time I didn't have a lot of money, so I was stuck in a coach seat like a dumbass, But 2017 to 2018 was a huge transition in the business. And then COVID at first looked like a negative, but in my business, it was actually a positive. Some of our highest sales were between the years of 21 and 22. 23 is the first year that from 2012 that I made less money than the year before, to be honest with you, but my income nearly doubled from 2018 to 2019, doubled just because I put the business first. And I still trained the same amount, but the amount of energy that went into product development, understanding manuals, making them better, like website design, all this other stuff was becoming more important than the training due to the energy, not the time. And that's when I started to notice like, fuck, I should have done that 5 years earlier. You know what I mean? Hindsight 2020, because if I'd have had more money, I could have flown first class. Maybe my back wouldn't have got screwed up. Yeah. All these things go into your mind, But at the end of the day, I felt like I gave everything I had. And now I'm just trying to use business as a new way to go 100 miles an hour that I can't do physically like I did. You know what I mean? So
as you see the lifters today that are trying to develop a business underneath the lifting kind of the same way that we do.
Sure.
And I believe their motives are kind of the same. They just want to make enough to be able to pay for their training, their tests and shit like that, and just, kind of move forward. What advice would you have for them?
Yeah. The big thing is keep overhead small. You got to keep your overhead low. If your overhead is too high, you're going to put undue stress on yourself. You have to maintain low. I mean, my gym, I don't know if you've ever been there, but my gym cost me $1,000 a month to keep open. $1,000 a month. Is it a shithole? Absolutely. But there's real work that goes on in there, and I don't need anything fancy for it. So if I had 5 clients quit tomorrow, it makes no difference to me. Does it make sense?
Yeah. Well,
versus if I had a huge 20,000 square foot facility with this badass sign right on the middle of High Street, and it's costing me 20 grand a month to keep it open. And then when COVID hits and now I can't have any clients in there, what's going to happen? You're going to fold. So my point being is always set yourself up for the worst possible scenario and then base your shit off of that.
Well, you've diversified the revenue as well.
Right.
Right. So it's the gym, it's the equipment, and it's the education.
I'm in a kind of a special situation because I can do some of the manufacturing myself. I can design my own prototypes. I don't just have ideas. I go out in the garage and cut metal and weld it.
Yeah.
A little bit different than just having an idea from a piece of equipment. Because it's weird. I'll get people call me all the time. Hey, I got this great idea. Well, like, how are you going to manufacture it? How are you going to market it? And then it's like, oh, there's all these other parts that are like, the thing of it is, I don't have to do a ton of marketing because like with you, I'm sure you get more than I do, but I get 30,000 hits a month on the website. So there's my marketing right there. I just did that through the lifting, create a name. Now I would say I'm probably more known as a tactical coach than I am like a power lifter. And again, you have to break that.
Well, that's my next question is how do you pivot that so you're not so stereotyped? Because, I know it was hard for you, right? And it's was hard as fuck for me. You know, it's not just that, but there's the Westside stereotype or conjugate stereotype that falls kind of in there too. So now you get stereotyped in such a small niche. Nobody wants to hear from you.
Yeah. I think the big thing is I got lucky. The first inclination that I knew I got lucky was I got interviewed by the Browns, and Buddy Morris interviewed me and wanted me to come on as first assistant because Tommy Malinsky was leaving to go to Jacksonville, I believe. And that's when I knew that my knowledge was a little bit more past powerlifting. And a lot of that came from the thousands of hours I had in experience through collegiate strength and conditioning. So on my resume, the first thing I would list wouldn't be powerlifting. It was that I had 10,000 hours of Division 1A collegiate strength sports experience, like football, basketball, track, swimming. That automatically kind of opens up the gap because now no matter what somebody's interested in, chances are it at least hybrids off of one of those areas. The next thing is you have to have a high degree in order to sit at a table where people are going to command a decent check. So when I go sit down and talk to, say, a fire chief or a general in the Army, they look at me more as an equal because of my degrees. Now, whether that's true or not doesn't matter, but the fact of the matter is they know that I put my time in. Not only under the bar, which matters to guys like me and you, street credit, but when you go and sit next to guys that could possibly sign hundreds of thousands of dollars, they're not going to do that for somebody who's just a powerlifter. And that's when I started to realize, and thank God my professors talked me out of what Louis was trying to do, which was, now just finish your undergrad and get your fucking ass over here and lift weights. And they were like, no, you don't realize like you need to get these degrees because one day you're going to be sitting at a table where you're going to be judged based on your resume. And that resume, if it doesn't have an MS or a PhD or something like that on it, your commanding of how much you can charge is going to be limited. Just because of your respect level, period. And so, I find that guys that want to be in my situation, like look at the whole body of work. Yes, I was a strong lifter and it got me in the door, but once I was in the door, I had a lot to show, with the degrees and all that stuff. And that's where it really becomes a lifelong endeavor.
Well, it didn't just stop with the degree because the continuing education that you still do. And I think that as those lifters that we were talking about, they're trying to build that ground level online business or whatever it is. They don't see that either.
Right.
Recently with the book that's going to come out in the spring, hopefully, right?
Yeah, we hope.
There's a shit ton of hours there in continuing education.
Yeah.
So you've always had that continuing education. And I could probably sit here and debate and say, you know what, you don't need it. Or at this point, you don't need it. You're not going to get in a position where you're going to train somebody where you need to know more than what you know now.
No, I tell people this constantly. 90% of what I know, I can only use 10% of the time.
But you're still in pursuit.
Yes.
Right? So I think that's a key thing.
Yeah, I have. So, I came out and borrowed a bunch of books from you when I was writing because you have a lot of stuff that's out of print. I have a stack of about 8 books now that I finished and completely sticky noted for the next edition, because to me it's like a treasure hunt. I'm looking for shit that people have forgotten about or never even seen before, and just piling up that information. So if you text me, say tomorrow, like, hey Matt, what do you know on this situation? I can literally in 10 minutes go find my books, my sticky notes, and pull up like 8 or 10 references on what you're wanting to know. You know what I mean? To me, that is power. And a lot of that shit you're never going to find on the internet because people don't take the time and effort and energy to put a lot of that real stuff on the internet. A lot of that stuff's been already done before. It's been lost. So yeah, the pursuit of constantly understanding why something works, which is why I put training in front of competing. You got to love the process before you can have the end result.
Now, the other part of keeping the overhead low means you have to do all the work, right? So,
well, the problem is like I have a media team now because all that stuff is just so much. But yeah, it's only been within the last couple of years. But yeah, you have to keep it low. And as you well know, that stuff is insanely expensive. So we get in quite a few arguments, the media team and I, about, hey, you're going to have to earn what you guys are charging, because it's like anything else. Initially, when you hire someone, they're not comfortable. They're trying to impress. After 6 months or a year, that impressment type thought process kind of gets out of the way, and there's got to be a little bit of a friction point in order for somebody to do a little bit more or at least maintain the same workload. So that can be a huge issue. You know, a lot of guys like Don Saladino and those guys will tell you, like, you get a media team, you fire them every 3 to 5 years and get a new media team every 5 years because they just get complacent. I think we've had employees that have all been that in one point or another, where they just get to a point where they just don't keep producing the same amount they were when they first started. And we usually get that corrected pretty easy, but you know, it's hard because as the business grows, more areas grow and more things have to be controlled. And sometimes you have to keep that control. You have to kind of delegate it instead of trying to control it all yourself. It's a hard pill to swallow as a single business owner, as a person. Like, everything I built on my own. And now you have relying on other people is tricky, which I'm sure you understand.
Yeah. So how have you navigated that?
Day to day. I mean, I don't have the answer on that one. That's a tough one. But the big thing is just kind of setting the standards from the get-go. You know, if they realize that you're not a person that's going to get pushed around real easy and you want it a certain way from the beginning, it's not a huge shock 6 months in. But if you start off kind of being too friendly and a little bit lackadaisical, it's just human nature to kind of push the envelope a little bit, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden nothing's getting done. So yeah, it's tough. You know what I mean? And it's constantly evolving. You know, I'm constantly trying to learn how to better myself or better the business or
So what are some of the things that you had to change in the last few years?
Just the amount of content that has to be pushed out. I mean, you know, I can get on social media, you know, every day and see 3-4 things from Elite FTS, right? You have to be in the person's eye on a consistent basis. And numbers, although they're very important and they're very good, like my last big squat was like 2017. That was almost 10 years ago. How do you stay relevant? You know, you stay relevant by staying in people's eye and doing different shit. So I don't know. I'm still learning those processes. I think I'm doing a pretty good job at it, but it's one of those things where business is always going to evolve and the way people are interacting is going to change. I mean, if you'd have told me 10 years ago that Instagram would be this big or Facebook ads or Google ads, I would be like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know what I mean? But now it's like a big part of the business, especially if you can build up a decent page where you don't have to pay for as much marketing because that stuff gets expensive, right?
Yeah.
Like, what people don't understand is a lot of these large businesses, like, man, I'd love to have that business. Some of these businesses are spending 6 figures a month on marketing alone. I mean, you have to think about that amount of money. Like, people are just putting it out as hopefully we make it back. You know, we were just talking about the Arnold and how much like boots cost there.
Yeah.
And the ROI on that. And it's like, how do you measure some of that?
Well, that's what becomes weird when you're trying to figure out the ROI on content, right? Because some of that's not so easily tracked.
No.
You know, you just put it out and it's like, well, shit, you know, did that actually do anything?
Yeah, you throw it out,
or
fingers
not do
crossed.
anything. And have you found any correlations with that?
I think posting a couple of times a day on Instagram is important, especially once you start to create a following. You know, I switched because I was getting so bombarded with so many questions on different shit over the last 3-4 years. I created the Patreon channel. And initially that was just to help some of the disabled kids that I was training at the gym because some of their parents couldn't afford to come in to train. I was like, well, if I can get people to pay me to answer questions, I don't have to charge these kids. You know, that was the initial drive for it. And then I started to realize that it was kind of a bigger part of the business. And then as the apps became more important for my tactical contracts, i.e. I got tired of writing workouts on the board at every fire station 10 times a week. You're like, there's got to be an easier way to do this. And then that's when the Train Heroic Conjugate app and tactical apps started to come out because we can make workouts 6 months in advance. And then I don't have to think about putting shit on the board every week and making sure that, you know, and they could calculate their weights. I could see who's checking in. There were just so many more variables to consider that were almost like automatic instead of having to be like, you know, more on my mind all the time. So a lot of times with this technology, you can make your life a little bit more simple if you know how to measure what you're doing. But a lot of people just jump into something without really any measurement tools to figure out how this is going to function. And some of that stuff I did too, and it just worked out well.
Well, the difference is you had a product that's valuable,
Sure.
right? So it's with police or with the fire, you could show a correlations in savings that's above the value
Yep.
or the expense,
Yep.
that they're paying. If they're going to save $200,000 per year, then what difference does it make if they got to pay
Yeah.
20, 30,000?
It was a huge gamble at first. So I started all that stuff off around 2007 and back to lifting again. So I'm powerlifting. I get in a like Flex magazine, and I'm like one of the top lifters in the world. And they mentioned that I have a master's degree and whatever. Well, that got seen by the U.S. Army. And then they asked me to come down and take a look at their weight training. And I basically, because it was so hot in Georgia at that time, I just was like, you guys suck at all of this. And I'm just kind of like Louis in some way, like, you guys are fucking stupid. You need to do this, blah, blah, blah. Thinking like, fire me, because I don't want to fucking be down here. It's too hot. You're fucking up my training, right? And next thing I know, they liked the honesty. They wanted the honesty. They were like, we've had doctors and trainers and all these people come down and they just pat us on the ass and tell us we're doing everything just fine. And the numbers aren't fine. They had a 1 in 3 non-deployable ratio. That means 1 out of every 3 guys couldn't go fight, even if they had a war right now. That's a big amount of expense. You figure once you get a guy in a Ranger regiment, and that was another negative. I started in a special forces unit where the guys were already hand selected. Well, those guys already have a different work ethic. And now I think that the military is like that and that the fire departments are like that. I don't realize.
Oh, okay.
That,
yeah.
Right.
Oh, God.
I don't realize that this isn't normal, right? Like, oh, these guys are going to like me. Oh, that's not normal. So that's kind of how it started. And they just liked the honesty. And then they initially swallowed their pride and did what I told them. So the initial data graphs that I had to show what I was doing was collected by Ranger Regiment, and we got that 1 in 3 deployable ratio down to 1 to 5. And then we saved him about $3.5 million in a year of injuries. Well, that automatically got the general hot and smoking because he's like, I can make a name for myself. So he gets transferred over to a 6,000 person unit at 4th Infantry in Carson, which is in Colorado. That was just when I was hitting those big world record squats. And he's like, can you come out here for like 12 weeks and straighten out my 4th Infantry? These guys are worse than the Rangers. They're hurt. They're beat up. We got to get them ready to go to Afghanistan, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, fuck, like 6,000 people. What am I going to do? So I came up with this idea that I would train trainers. So basically all the people that were like majors or colonels or in charge of PT, they had to sit in my 40-hour class and learn about basically dynamic effort, max effort method, repetition method. And they had to pass a test on what I created as a curriculum, which became the Mountain Athlete Warrior Project. And when that went through in about 2.5 years, we were saving millions of dollars. Well, that caught the attention of the fire departments around town. So 2009 or so, they do this huge thing for Ranger Regiment. And I'm in this big magazine article. And they find out that I'm local. Dublin finds out I'm local and asks me if I can do the same thing at Washington. And 5 years later, after showing the amount of money we've saved, which we're almost in like 300,000 a year, all I got to do is present that information with the program and now the app. And it's kind of like stupid if you don't get into it. You know what I mean? So now I can kind of have this chest up high kind of deal at these conferences and be like, this is the information. This is how we do it. This is how you can get involved. If you want to save a couple $100,000 a year after you pay me, give me a call. But it didn't start that way. It was all an experiment. It was all kind of, they took my word for it and ran with it. But then other people were collecting data I had no control over. And all I did really was get them stronger and not make them do the same fucking thing over and over and over again. I mean, if you want to break it down to simplicity, it's a conjugate mindset with specific tasks involved occasionally versus all the time. It's the same reason why you don't squat with a straight bar constantly.
Yeah.
You're going to create overuse injuries. But in theory, if you could squat 20 different ways that has a specific adaptation to a straight bar, if timed correctly, why wouldn't you take that way and get strong in all angles and all positions and then dial it the right way.
So when you get to the fire department, I don't want to say it's Gen Pop, but it's damn close.
It's close.
It's pretty close. How's that scaled down for when their first cycle or whatever you want to call it, their first block?
So the first year, I don't really, I introduce barbell training, but they don't train it. They basically train in traction, a non-compressive movement. So tons of back extensions, tons of reverse hypers, tons of belt squats, tons of lat pull downs, and tons of triceps. What I find after about 10 months to 14 months, depending on how well they're adapting, what I find is that once I teach them the barbell movements, their technique is already at 85% versus jack shit 0. But you have to think in that.
Well, let's stay on that for a minute, because that can also be applied to a high school athlete that's never trained before, right? So if we dig into that a little bit deeper, I think there's some important things that are standing out there.
Sure.
Are they strong enough to even display good technique in the first place?
Usually not.
No, right? So you're finding ways to build that strength to get to that square one. That's first point. Second point, it didn't happen in 2 weeks.
Nope, a year.
Yeah, a year.
And that even means if they're 20 years old.
Yeah.
But a lot of those guys, there's a good and bad. A lot of fire guys don't initially like to work out. So if you come in real fucking easy with real easy exercises that are easy to understand, you can buy them in. Because like, dude, my back feels so much better when I go lift this patient. No shit, asshole. Right? But the thing of it is like now they're interested in the squats. Now they become slowly over time interested in the deadlifts and the bench press. And now you've tricked them over the year or two into a system that they're training like a fucking powerlifter, but just smarter than most powerlifters.
Now, when the system's revolving, say 2-3 years in, and then somebody new comes in that's deconditioned, does it still take them the year, or is it expedited because everybody around them are coaches?
It's usually faster, I would say 4 to 6 months, because now they got 5 or 6 guys at their station that maybe don't have my eye, but they got a way better eye than somebody at Lifetime Fitness.
Yes.
So now they're sucked into that culture, but now you got 5 or 6 guys that have already been there and know how to get them better, and in 6 months they're ready. The only reason a lot of times it took a year instead of, I'd say, 6 months, was because of budgetary standards. I couldn't see them every week. I saw a unit every week, which was 3 units, because they work like Thursday might be unit 1, the next Thursday's unit 2, the next Thursday's unit 3, and then you're back to unit 1. So really in a year, I've only seen them maybe 20 times. So if you think about it in that respect, it makes sense that it takes a year. Yeah. But if I could see them like 3 times a week, it takes 6 months.
So in that first year, how is that phasic structure? Is it still like if the belt squat's not the squat, right? I'm just making an assumption. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that still phasically structuring?
Yeah, it still stays in, and a lot of times it stays as the main movement, and then we just touch the power lifts. Because the problem with it is that if you train the straight bar too often, these guys are lifting really heavy patients in awkward positions. So when you and I get done squatting, we go sit in our office or chill out, and we don't have to go and fucking lift some person between a kitchen and a sink, trying to get them in a weird position on a cot. They might have to do that 5, 6, 8 times a day. They're getting called constantly by nursing homes to help. They're picking people up and taking them to the hospital from their houses. So you have to keep all that in mind too. You have to build up that capacity in a slower sense. So what I do is I would still say that on general, 70% of their total loading is still in a non-compressive environment. And that stays forever. The other problem that you have to remember is like a guy gets hired as a fireman, right? At say 21. He's a fireman until he's 55. It's not until he's 29. Like an average powerlifter might get excited about it at 16 and they're done at 22. Yeah. These guys are their babies and their insurance problems for 30 years. So you have to maintain some sort of a prehabilitation type mindset on them with touching on the main lifts to see improvement in performance without the mileage, which is how I trained anyway. Yeah. So, it's got a little bit of a difference than a powerlifter, but it has that mindset. I mean, the average deadlift, and this is no fucking joke, the average deadlift at Washington Township when I started was 190 over 120 guys. And that's what I was comfortable taking them with. We weren't going to get any back problems. We just measured them last week, and the average is 400. 190 to 400. And half the guys I started with in 07 are retired. These are new guys.
Mm-hmm.
But we took it slow and easy and built that strength up at a high level very slowly.
So what's the upper body part look like then?
So the upper body, the bench press was somewhere around 145 to 160, and now we're sitting around 265 to 280.
What about movement wise? Is because now it's not distracting.
Right.
I guess a pull down would be distracting, but there's not a whole lot of distracting.
Yeah, we do kettlebell swings as a test too because it's easy to do. So we do it to the eye, and we have them swing a 35-pound kettlebell because a 35-pound kettlebell in motion is about 2 times the weight of what it weighs. So it's about 70 pounds. If you look at the gear on average and when they walk into a fire, they're carrying about 60 to 80 pounds of shit.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to match their environment, and a 35-pound kettlebell seems to do very well. The average kettlebell swing when we started was 1 minute and 20. That's how long they could do it and set it down. And now we're over 5.5 minutes. And if you think about swinging a kettlebell for 5.5 minutes, that's 35 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
You can get an idea of their work capacity now. So
what modifications are made just because of the shift work that they do?
Right. The modifications are made by basing things on RPE again. I just go in and ask them questions like, hey, how many runs you have last night? We were really dead. We got good sleep. Okay. Up the training 10%. Like I'm starting to up or down it 10% or so based on information. How'd you guys eat? What'd you have for breakfast?
Do the training days change based upon their schedule?
Yeah. So on an ideal world, I think I see what you're asking. On an ideal world, what I try to get them to do is when they come on duty, they have to check the trucks and all the equipment, make any changes or arrangements for repair if possible, like fire truck, EMS vehicle. Does the door latches work? Is it clean? Is it tire pressure good? All these things that you don't want to become a problem in an emergency situation.
Yeah.
Once they get done with that, then I tell them to train upper body. So they do upper body around 9:30, 10 o'clock, and then they do legs right when they leave. So 24 hours later in the morning, they do legs. It only takes 40 minutes out of their time off. They have 2 full days to recover, and they do it all over again the next shift. So they do upper on duty, legs right when they get off. Upper on duty, legs right when they get off. You're hitting your workouts 4 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not really invading a lot of their free time. That isn't a perfect scenario situation. That's how a lot of the guys that are really into it, that's how they train.
All right.
That's how I would train if I was a fireman.
That's probably one of the questions that you get asked the most, right?
Sure.
Because shift work is something we always get asked about.
Yeah, legs are you don't want fatigued legs on duty.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do that, you have 48 hours to recover them before you're back on duty. You can do a run with your arms a little tired. That's not going to be that big a deal.
Yeah.
But if your legs are buckling, bad news.
So then how is the conditioning work implemented into that?
So what we do is we do the Wenning Warmups. Almost all of them do it because we're correcting motor imbalances with that. So what I say is that we do the warm-ups and we try to get them done in the time parameters in which I set. So like we try to have 3 exercises, 4 sets of 25 done in 12 minutes. So it's like boom, 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 boom. They don't get to rest. What I've noticed is that their GPP automatically goes up just by doing that. Then if we do the accessories at the end of the main lift, we do the accessories in a circuit-based style. Like, so now it's still failure, but it's like maybe push downs and then pull downs and then like internal, external rotators. They got to do that in a circuit-based too, so their heart rate can't come down. And now when they go on runs, they're like, dude, I don't get fatigued hardly at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, it's because you're maintaining heart rate while you're training. I don't care how long they rest with the main lift, but the warm-ups and the accessories are done in a circuit-based style training to where we can condense the amount of energy that they're using in that workout to match kind of what they're going to deal with in a fire. Now, we make them drag sleds and full equipment and on bottles. A lot of times the real advanced guys, I'll make them swing the kettlebells on air, which I don't know if you've ever been on a fireman mask, but it has a valve and it almost has a little bit of a dead point where you're like, and it's not immediate. It's got a little bit of a valve change and that can screw with your breathing quite a bit. So we will train in those bottles because they have fillers at every station.
Yeah.
So we get them used to that stuff too. But initially that doesn't happen in the first 16 months. Because they just got to get used to working out.
Yeah.
Once that becomes good and we're at a base strength level where I feel we're above average, then you can start adding specific shit. But you find that guys that tend to not work out and then they go do specific fire drill capacities, the injury rates are through the roof And it's because they don't have the basic general physical fitness capacities, and then they go do specific context, and now they got a big problem.
All right, I want to kind of stay on that same topic, but let's jump out of that demographic and just strength and conditioning in general, powerlifting, so forth. Over the past few years, there's the emergence of effective reps for hypertrophy, right? And then there's the emergence of the only reps that really matter in powerlifting are the top reps. And what's kind of getting lost is all the reps that lead up to that, which, in my opinion, build work capacity.
Sure.
So work capacity is kind of like the ugly stepchild right now that nobody's kind of addressing.
Yeah.
Where talk a little bit about that, like the importance of work capacity, raising work capacity, and then how that does relate to the
main lifts,
effective reps, or whatever you want to call all that, the top sets. Because in one regard, you could just sit there and say, well, if hypertrophy is just in the top 3 reps, and I'm going to do, then any powerlifter that only does triples, singles and triples should be the most jacked, right?
Right.
Because they're all effective reps essentially, but they're not.
No.
So something else is happening, which would be that development of the work capacity.
Yeah. And the difference in individual fiber makeup.
Yes.
Like if you and I were to get laid on an autopsy table and they're going to take apart our quadriceps, we're not going to have the same amount of type 2A and B fiber. And that means we're going to adapt differently to training as well. So that is a huge component I don't hear people talking about, which is the neurological adaptation side of what kind of fibers do I have? Because some people are born to be decent runners, whether they tap into it or not, and born to be decent powerlifters. It doesn't mean you don't have to work for it. It just means it's attainable.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's only going to be one Usain Bolt every 50 years. And that's even if he gets the right training and et cetera. But what you're asking is work capacity. And the thing of it is, what we have to remember is that you might be able to do something, but being able to recover from it is a completely different scenario. So if I can work up to a top set and smoke that shit, but it takes me 2 weeks to recover from it because I'm out of shape, how is that conducive for proper training, even in a hypertrophy sense? Because in reality, what we're missing is the time in which we're doing the workout. So people put so much emphasis on what they're doing that day, but they don't recognize what it does to them 72 hours from now. So if you can consistently train at a decent level, say every 3 days, a muscle part, and put it through the hurt locker just enough to heal every 3 days and do it again and again and again, that person will have more hypertrophy than a person that can go balls to walls for a set, but then they got to back way down because they can't heal from it. That's where the work capacity comes in. You have to be able to heal from what you do in order to sustain positive progress in your training.
Mm-hmm.
If all you're doing is breaking shit down when you're repairing it, well, I think it's called your CAR, catabolic active reserve, which is what the Russians call it. Once you have exceeded that level, every bit of training you're doing is catabolic, not anabolic. And so that has something to do with hypertrophy too. And that is mostly based on your fitness level, which means, can I recover every 3 days and train the same body part over and over and over again? One way around that is a conjugate system where you change the exercise. The muscle group is getting hit, but the exercise or the mode is changing to allow more volume over longer periods of time, which is exactly why the concurrent conjugate system was created, in order to create high volume and high intensity on a consistent basis. Whereas if you use a linear type system, you're going to have to back down because the loading parameter is too specific.
Mm-hmm.
So in hypertrophy range, I think it has more to do with making sure you can attack the muscle every 3 days, because we know that extreme workloads take 72 hours to recover due to Zatsiorsky's books and the thousands of lifters that came from the Soviet Union. If we do too much in one day, we're actually causing more damage. We have to look at things in monthly parameters versus daily parameters. Not what can we recover from in a day, but what can we recover from in a month? And then base your training systems on that ideology. And over the long run, you'll be stronger and bigger.
Yeah.
Case closed. Does that answer what you're asking?
A little bit, to where I'm speaking more volume of percentages under the 70% range, right? Because You can, make big jumps and
Yeah.
shit like that and just do the main movements, but you're not doing any accessories. You're not doing anything else. And it's going to lead to what you're talking about,
Mhm.
right? Whereas if you're building that volume, the reps that everybody says are not effective, right?
Oh,
Well,
right.
they're effective in, getting you in better shape, building that work capacity, allowing you to recover better,
Sure.
as long as they're not like 20 sets to failure, stupid
Yeah.
shit like that. But they have a place that's being minimized in the conversations today. Like that's not important. And it is,
Yeah.
because it aids in that recovery.
Well, you need all different forms of rep ranges. So, like your tendons and ligaments, per some of the research show that they accommodate to training in sets of 20. That's something that I don't hear anybody talking about, which is everybody's talking about muscle growth. What's attached to the muscle that allows the movement? Ligaments, tendons, soft tissue. That needs its own parameter of repetition ranges and hypertrophy training in order for you to allow your muscle to even grow.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can have the biggest muscle in the world. If it's not attached to a bone, it ain't doing shit.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you need rep ranges for that. So all that stuff's kind of tied in. That's why if you look at the Wenning Warmups, they're mostly 25. And that came from me seeing a lot of research on ligament and tendon adaptation to training being over sets of 20. And I'm like, okay, well, this keeps me bulletproof. The main lift is like a tester of muscular tension or power, speed work. The accessories are hypertrophy. Now, hypertrophy, in my opinion, based on what I've read and what I've trained for many, many years, is based on pushing until the muscle tissue really can't fully contract anymore. But the problem with it is that the exercise library of those movements, now the muscle groups can stay the same, but those exercises have to be rotated on a consistent basis because what the body doesn't like is specific pressure at the exact same point all the time. That's where you need to rotate that. What do I feel is the best rep range? Somewhere in a time of about 45 seconds. Now, you could break that down any way you want. You could do 5-second tempos, or you could just go until 45 seconds is up. A lot of that has to do with sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, which you have two different types of main hypertrophy, which is actin and myosin, which is the actual proteins that can join themselves and tug. Then you have the sarcoplasm, which is the cell that stores more glycogen and water around those proteins. That's more what I call bodybuilding hypertrophy. And then actin and myosin hypertrophy comes from the 1s and the 3s and the heavy training. It's like you see an ex-powerlifter that's really busted his ass. I'll give you an example. A guy like Bill Kazmaier, he's 70 years old and he walks into some place and he still looks fucking jacked. He can't even train that hard anymore. So how does he still look that way? It's because actin and myosin tend to be a little bit more of a permanent change, and sarcoplasmic comes and goes due to volume. So it also depends on what type of hypertrophy you're trying to look at. I think that the accessories hit sarcoplasmic, the main lifts hit actin and myosin, and the warm-ups condition the ligaments, tendons, and cartilage and soft tissue. So if you're attacking all three of those areas, where's the weak link? I don't see it, especially if you're changing the angles and you're hitting the weak points of the muscle groups. Core lifts in reality should be utilized as an assessment tool, not a strength tool. So when you ask somebody how much you squat, I like to hear the number plus what the breakdown is. Well, I could squat more if I didn't shoot my hips up first or if my knees didn't come in. Because now we're getting a structural analysis of which muscle group should be playing a part in the warm-up and the accessories, which gives us a cleaner picture of where we should be taking the training.
How often do you change the accessories or rotate the accessories?
Literally daily. So the accessories now for simplistic research, if you talk about intensity or volume, I'll give you an example. I usually write my workouts now because I'm semi-retired and I see it work really well with intermediate and beginners, is have the same accessories for 3 weeks. Use week 1 as an intro, higher volume, understand the exercise. The next week, take the volume down, but the intensity up. And the last week, give it all you got. And then switch that around. So every month, they're changing. Now, if you look at it from a pure exercise sense, they're staying the same, but the volume parameters and the intensity parameters are changing on a weekly basis. So that's what I would consider a good conjugate
Now,
program.
is there a 4th week deload with that accessory before changing to the next?
So usually the deload happens by dropping the Wenning warmups down to 2 rounds instead of 4. The main lift only goes to an RPE of 7, and then the accessories go to a failure set of 1 time. So if I got, say, incline dumbbells, I do that 1 set instead of 2 or 3. Now I've cut the volume down 60%, but the skeleton of the base of the workout looks exactly the same. And I noticed that people recover from that better, especially drug-free too. So week 4, we're introducing everything. We have a high volume, 4 sets. Everything's high volume. The next week is kind of in the middle, and the next week is high intensity, lower volume. And then we do a deload where we change the exercises and introduce them and then build from there in a 3-week wave. That's kind of how I've been doing it. But I got that a lot from Verkhoshansky on like jump parameters of what he would do with like intermediate to beginner jumpers. And I started to realize that it worked really well for lifters too, especially if they're in the intermediate beginner phases and they're trying to learn the movements. So if I do, say, a safety bar squat, I've never seen it before. Well, if it's not that hard week 1 and you're just feeling it out, big deal. Then week 2, you take it up 20%. Well, you're already comfortable with it because you did it last week. And then the next week you take it balls to the wall. You're probably going to have a better environment and scenario than just throwing in random shit all the time, unless you're you or me.
Well, even in that case, sometimes you just need to become reacclimated to the movement because it may not have been in for the past 5 months.
Sure. And the guys will tell you at the gym, like they don't see an exercise sometimes for a year. Then I'll just throw it back in, but now they're all good at it. And they adapt to it in week 1. By week 3, they can max it. And then we go back into it. And what I mean by maxing it, I mean in like anything under like 4 or 5, like 3s. But if the first week I introduce it and I have it at 10s, and we only go to say a 7.5 RPE, which is like 2 sets in the tank, you kind of build some confidence in it. You're like, hey, this feels pretty good. Then the next week we put the hammer to it. The next week we really put the hammer to it.
Now, have you found if they're doing the Wenning warm-ups, do they not need the sled on other days to be able to help build that work capacity?
Yeah, I find that the warm-up kind of negated all the extra mini workouts. I have a manual on mini workouts that I did when I was my strongest, but I was sleeping 12 hours a day. So it really, the hardest part is you can add more, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get any better from it. And that's where that becomes very confusing, because you give a beginner mini workouts, it could help if they have a good athletic background, or it could be terrible. And a lot of times, do you have the mental discipline to stop when enough's enough?
That's the problem.
That's the big problem, right? So you give somebody a sled work, and then let's say you magically become invisible, and then in 3 workouts, that shit became maximal. Because they think they just got to go heavier and heavier and heavier. They don't understand that there's all these other variables that we can change and rotate and make different. And that's where it becomes more of a science. And that's why most people need a highly skilled coach in the beginning and the end stages. Because at the end stage, you might have the capacity to be super strong, but you're not going to know everything that somebody that's been in it for 20 years and seen where you're at now and been there before. You're not going to know when to stop. In the beginning stages, your fucking technique sucks. So it needs constant reinforcement. And then there's a whole nother bag of problems in the middle, which you could go too hard, too easy. But the problem is that in each stage, the gray area becomes smaller and smaller, like of what's optimal. In the beginning, you suck at everything. So it doesn't matter. You could do 5 extra sets on squats, big deal. At the end, it's a huge deal. You got to know when to stop. So I think that's a huge problem that we see in this field now, is that people want to copy the advanced, but they don't realize that they're 10 years behind. They got to start here. So, it's a constant juggling game of trying to figure out what's optimal for what person at what time, instead of just trying to bottleneck everybody into some special system.
Every couple of years we see different new exercises that emerge, right? There's always like the fads where there, at this point to me, those are just humorous, but we also see different mistakes that are being made. It's like a pattern. It's like, oh, okay, here's this mistake. Everybody's overworking, right? Or everybody's underworking or something like that. Where are you seeing the biggest mistakes now?
I think like, you know, when I first squatted my first 700, I was almost 21. I was still 20. And Ed Cohen was at the meet and saw it. And he's like, man, if you could stay healthy for like another 4 or 5 years, you'll squat 800. And I was like, fucking 4 or 5 years? I'm thinking, man, I ended up doing it in like 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
But point being was, he was seeing if I was willing to be a long-term development. And that's what I think is really missing now. You asked that question yesterday and I posted exactly how I felt.
Yeah.
Is that nobody wants the time or the energy to actually educate themselves along the way. Because here's the real question is, when you're physically done with hitting huge numbers, which is going to happen to everyone, what do you have to offer? Do you just have what you've went through, what you offer, or do you have an education that built that up to where you can make this a priority for other people to learn from? And this is what we miss is like, if you look at the generation before us, the only guy that was really talking high education was Fred Hatfield. And then what happened? He got old, people quit listening to him, and all of his shit disappeared. And then somebody reads it 20 years later and it's a new fucking idea again. It's like I had Poliquin showing me books from France and like Italy from like the 1930s that had exercises that are brand new right now. They were invented 100 years ago, but they became distant because unlike other fields, we don't keep building on each other. We forget the past and then we reinvent it in the future. And it's just like, I mean, you and I have been to the Arnold for 30 years. The same goddamn supplements disappear for 3-4 years, come back out and they're all new rage. You know what I mean? First whey is the best thing ever invented. Then it sucks. And then now it's beef protein. And then it's this. And why don't you just fucking eat right and train hard and shut the fuck up? Right. I mean, I'm just saying, like, you see creatines, like, you know, that was the new shit in 1990. But the guys before that, like Arnold, were eating red meat all the time. We're getting creatine anyway. So it's like, I don't know. I think it's a longevity problem. I think it's a problem of they train too specific too fast and they don't realize that they're creating all kinds of wear and tear. I mean, most guys, like, I'll give you an example, like Larry Wheels. How in the fuck is he retired from powerlifting at 27? That's when I was hitting my first records because he blew his wad training too hard, too fast. And now he's plagued with injuries. We can name how many people like that today. But back in our day, we didn't see too many guys that just popped up and were disappeared. They stayed in the game for a long time. Steve Goggins, how long was he good?
Decades, probably 3-4 decades.
Yep. How long was Eddie Cohen good?
Yeah, decades.
How long was Larry Pacifico good? Won 10 world titles back to back, never beaten. I mean, you start thinking about that and you're like, what did they know that these new guys don't know? The numbers really aren't that much different. I mean, they might be a little bit better, but they're not crazy better.
Yeah. The more I've thought about this, it's because I continue to think about it because it's an attention economy. I get that. There's the marketing, like buy my shit because you're going to get stronger faster and all the stuff. But I've concluded that it's the messenger or the group of messengers, right? And what the overall overreaching message is, where I think, you know, I hate to say back in the day, the overreaching message was all this shit takes time, where the kids know this because they graduate from high school. Like they go from junior high to high school and they already know this is going to take 3 years or 4 years, however their school system's developed. And then each teacher is a different level. So they know this is 4 years, right? Actually 12, right? Total for me to graduate. Or if you go into college, you know, it's 4 years, maybe 5, in my case, 7 for a bachelor. But you know, here's the starting point, here's the end point, and it's a duration of time. And then everybody that's involved in that system knows this is the duration of time. Like there's some outliers that may graduate high school in 2 years because they test out, but fucking outliers, right?
Sure.
So that whole group of messengers in all those areas that kids already know, it's not like I can't blame it on them because they already know this because they've been raised through that, you know, elementary school, 7 years or 6 years, whatever it's going to be. So they know that. but they're surrounded by all the people
Yeah.
that are reinforcing that, just because that's how the system is
Mhm.
created, right or wrong. That's how the system's created. Go in the military 4 year, you know, all these things are there. Now you go into powerlifting, that overreaching message has now become, here's my 12-week program, you know, put this on, put this on, put this on, where more messengers that are saying what we're saying, like, look at this as a quadrennial,
Mhm.
you know, and then go from one to the other. And the other thing I think that kind of helped lay that a little bit, at least when I was coming up, is the classification system, class 4, class 3, class 2, you know, so it's like, fuck, I can't, and qualifying for the nationals, like, fuck, I told 1,200 pounds, 1,600 pounds, I need
Yeah.
1,890.
Yeah.
Like, fuck, I can't do that in a year. I mean, any logical person is going to realize I'm not going to go here
Sure.
to there, but that's where I want to be, where the carrots changed, I guess.
Yeah.
Instead of that carrot being qualifying here, qualifying there, whatever it's going to be, it's changed into, here's the fastest way.
Right.
Where economy, which is good, because we all talk about training economy, like, you don't want to overreach and do stupid shit. Somehow that got transferred into faster.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think that a lot of that's our economy. A lot of that's our, and I hate it because, you know, powerlifting and bodybuilding and all that kind of share the same group.
Yeah.
And it sucks because if you want to be super strong, it's like, name a pro bodybuilder that won an Olympia under the age of 26.
Mm-hmm.
Not very many.
Yeah.
Right? Dorian wasn't in his prime till his 30s. Ronnie wasn't in his prime, I want to say, until he was like 34, because his last Olympia was like he was 40. How long did it take them with those superior genetics and amazing amounts of drugs to reach an Olympia level strength? Our problem is the low hanging fruit dudes that try to sell everybody short-term bullshit. If we could cut them out, and I do this with 3 things. We've talked about this before. What's someone's education? If somebody, and it's not always true because we know some jackasses with some PhDs, but the guys that are jackasses with PhDs also are weaker than fuck. So if we look at a guy, does he have a high degree? Is he strong? And how long was he able to sustain that strength? If it's more than 10 years, I kind of want to listen to what he has to say. But if he's a guy that might have a PhD, but he's weaker than shit and spreading a bunch of bullshit, he's missing 1 or 2 of the 3 pillars. If I have a guy that's a world champion powerlifter, but he was only good for 1 year, I don't care what he has to say. Not that it may not have value. I just don't look at it as close, especially if he didn't go to school. I find that those 3 pillars, if you put those 3 pillars into play, it starts to really narrow down the people that you want to listen to. Let's look at somebody like Stan Efferding, for example. Multimillionaire, has a pretty high degree, and was really good at what he did for 2-3 decades, and still looks amazing at mid-50s. Why wouldn't you want to listen to him, right? You look at guys like O'Hearn. I know he gets a lot of flack on social media, but that fucking guy has looked like a pro bodybuilder for 40 years. He weighed 250 when he was 17. You know, like, and he maintained his physique for that long. That's not drugs. I'm not saying, I don't know if he took anything or not.
No, I get you what you're saying.
You don't sustain that level of proficiency on just anabolics alone, period, in the story. So the problem is like, look at somebody's full body of work. If they have high education, they've been super strong for a long time, they probably have something to hold on to. Everybody else would be highly looked at as, what the fuck are you trying to sell? And why is this bullshit better? And how can you fix anything in this short a period of time?
Yeah. Well, I think the other part of that is when you find the people that you're speaking about, you will find differences of opinion, which is a good thing.
Sure.
But where people put all the focus is in that difference of opinion and not the 90-some% that they're all going to agree upon, which is, that comes back on to the person that's aspiring to learn.
Sure.
And when I was coming up, I would look through, say if it was HIIT training, I wanted to go to like Ken Leistner, I wanted to go to the people that was them. That's all they did. They didn't know anything else. They didn't want to know anything else because to them, that was the holy grail.
That's their life.
Yeah. Louis, the holy grail, like conjugate. You're not going to sell him on anything outside of that.
No.
But when you know what that person's bias is and you want to learn from them, then you can either get sucked into the cult right? Which you don't want to do that, but you can get close enough to them to be able to learn what's working here that also works here. And it works here, then it works here. And then under the surface, you're kind of developing your own philosophy over a period of time, which is going to be a conglomerate of all of those things.
Past experiences.
Instead of just being a cult follower.
Yeah.
Which we see that happen too. But I don't want to learn from the cult follower. I want to learn from the guy that started the cult.
Right.
Right. Because it's already distilled at that point.
Yeah.
But you also need to know what their bias is.
Yeah. You need the firsthand information, not the secondhand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's why it was so important, I think, even in our generation, where guys would go and do internships and they would go learn from somebody else for 10 or 15, 20 weeks or maybe even a year before that they started to collect their own thought processes on what they feel was advantages and disadvantages based on what they saw.
Mm-hmm.
So how I think about things is a mixture of being around you and Louie and guys like Verkashansky and Zatsiorski and Kramer and all those guys. It's just kind of a melting pot. And certain beliefs I have fit in really good with Kramer and some of them don't. Some of them fit in really good with Louie and some of them really don't. So, but then you find like, well, yeah, this is a good scenario for this particular model, but it may not work for everything. And, you know, everybody's going to have a little bit of bias based on who they learn from, but who they learn from is a big deal.
It's a big deal. And to learn from multiple sources is a big deal too.
Huge. You
know, because even in the past 3 years, you've met other people that are completely different disciplines, you know, in the fitness side.
Sure.
Right. And it's different. But it's not that much different when you're working with the firemen and stuff like that. So it's like, you can find exercise, you can find something in anybody that's successful and not have to be them.
Yeah.
You know, then to be able to pull from them, especially when you get into the fitness world, because the strength world's a little fucked up. The fitness world's a lot fucked up. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. It's a lot fucked up.
Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes
they're not, you can't tell the difference.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes they generally are not there to help anybody.
Sure.
Where at least in the strength world, I think the majority of the people, maybe some misguided, some too biased or whatnot, they're generally there to help people get stronger.
Yeah.
And then the further you niche down, I think it gets even more and more of that.
I agree.
Where that world's just, it's like, what? It's just, you know.
It's the Arnold Classic.
Yeah. It's crazy like that. Were there any topics you wanted to go over I didn't bring up?
No, I think that's great. I think we've hit pretty much everything I thought we were gonna hit on. I just thought maybe be some cool stories. Like if you remember when I first walked into Westside, do you remember that story or do you remember that time?
Faintly. I mean, I remember that time, right? Because anybody that walked in, we didn't give a fuck about.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's like intruder, get out of my fucking way. We're doing what we're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember walking in and you were kind of standoffish at the gym. And it was a weird scenario because, you know, you drive 3 hours away and you think, hey, I made it. They're going to be, I don't know, not respectful, but they're going to be like, hey, glad to see you here. You know, and there was none of that. And I was like, these guys are fucking serious, man. And I remember, I think Jerrio was out of jail at the time, but he was in there and Tilt, the big black guy was in there. And I remember Louie kicking him out because I beat him in the tricep extensions. Oh, so we were doing like extensions. And I was a pretty good bencher. Yeah. And we were doing like fucking 80s. Like, you know, I mean, that's pausing on the ground. That's a bitch. And I wasn't going to let him beat me. So I smoked him by like 2, maybe 3 reps. He got like 10 and I got like 13. And the next 2 weeks I came back and he was kicked out. Yeah. I got a funny story about him because he's big, man. Huge.
Big as fuck. I mean, he's like
6'2", 430.
And he'd always get called. First time he came in the gym, he squatted $1,000, by the way. We just kept throwing shit on. It's like, what the fuck is this? But he keep getting called on depth. And I remember one time in the gym, it's like, and we had him sit down on a Mountain Dew can. Okay. And it still wasn't hip to knee ratio because he's so big. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, you know, how do you judge this? But I have a picture somewhere where he was leaning back against the lat pull down machine and you couldn't even see the machine. He was so fucking immense. It was unbelievable, you know, how big he was. But, and one thing I think that gets missed with at least the morning crew that I was in is a lot of us there only had so much time. You know, I'm leaving work, I'm getting there at 8:30 and I got to be back to train a client at 11:30.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a very short window, which created the density, which Louis wanted, but I don't know if it was actually intended. Right. Because Chuck had to get out of there. So, because he had to get to work, you know, everybody had to, for the most part, most had to get the fuck out of there.
Yeah.
You know, so there's no time to fuck around. It's like you get in there, we start at this time. If I do everything that I have to do, then I'm leaving.
Yeah.
You know, I have to get the fuck out.
Yeah.
You know, so that chit chat and all that other stuff was compressed because of those reasons too.
Because I remember we get done and the only people that would be able to go eat was like Fuzzner and Louis.
Yeah.
They had time to go eat, but everybody else was gone.
Yes.
Because we used to go eat at that Tumbleweed. It was right there off of Broad Street.
Yeah. So you stick somebody in there at 8:30, like, what job are they doing? You know, it's a second shift job that they got enough time to go home, shower, eat, and go.
Yep.
Or me, I'm going between clients at a dead time. You know, that's kind of in there.
Because you were in charge of capital at that time, right?
Yeah. So I was personal training at that time. So I had clients from 5 in the morning until 8, bolt, get there at 8:30, and I have another client at 11:30.
Yeah, around the lunchtime.
So just, you know, get the fuck in and get out.
Yeah.
And it worked because if I had more idle time, you know, I might have done worse shit than I did do. Right. So, you know, so that kind of kept a cap on all that. I'm trying to think of some other stories from back then.
I remember walking in and Kenny Patterson being the shortest but thickest fucking guy I've ever seen.
Yes.
He was like 250, but only like 5'6", maybe. Fucking arms. I mean,
and again, another one that had to get in and get out because he had to get to work. You know, so it was.
Did they do that parking garage stuff? Is that what they were doing?
Kenny was working in a warehouse and distribute. I don't know if he was a manager at the time. Yeah. You know, but worked into being a manager at the warehouse. But and a lot of us were choosing jobs that would fit that mold,
that schedule.
You know, like if it didn't have second shift, no, I'm not doing that.
Right.
You know, and then the evening crew would be a little bit different because they're off work now. You know, they can hang out later, they can do things later, which is just a different environment.
Gritter being in there, and who was I'm trying to think of the other guys. They were in there in the evenings.
But Gritter and Bob Coe would be in there sometimes.
Bob
Youngs would be in there sometimes.
Bob Youngs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember all those guys. It was interesting, but I still remember the most magical place was like when it was still where the barbershop is now. Yeah. It was just a little hole in the wall, but there was just something in there, man. Like you walked in and it was just all work. And we moved it to that place in 2003.
Yes.
And that's where everything started to get weird.
Yes. I didn't adjust well to that because I was used to that smaller environment. And I remember the first squat session, you know, because it still wasn't that big, right? What was it? Maybe 2,000 square foot over there.
Yeah. I think both of them combined was like 3,800.
Yeah. Where I think the first one was like 600.
Yeah.
And so, and when you would squat in the dimmest location, everybody's there. I mean, even if they're not there and they're doing reverse hypers, they're 3 steps away from being there.
Yep.
And the first squat session is like, can somebody get the fuck over here? Yeah. You know, to spot or run the monolift because it was just large enough
where people could get some space,
where they could get the space and move away to be able to go do all that. I'm like, man, this sucks, man. I don't like this.
I know.
You know,
it took away the atmosphere.
For me, it did, you know, and I was on my ass end anyhow. So it's like, fuck, I can barely stay together. And now I got to fucking yell every single time somebody needs to come over here to do that.
We had some awesome training sessions in the new place, but it was just I just always remembered the feel of the old place when I first got there in like 99. And it was something that you just can't explain to people. Like you walked in and there's just pure rage in the walls. Like, you know, every time somebody went for speed work or max work or everything became a competition. Everything became, in some ways, bad. You know, like you push way too hard, way too fast.
And it was cultivated, right? So I believe I was the first lifter that had an elite total to actually move to come to Columbus. Right? Before then, everybody was developed there. Right. You know, so that's all they knew. You know, was that, and it was cultivated with that attitude. I had it beforehand, so it just kind of added to that. But I thought Louis' training was bullshit, so there's that. But you know, after I started drinking the Kool-Aid, then you know it fell more into line, and slowly towards the end is when people started coming from other places. Yeah. And I distinctly remember a conversation with Louis that you start bringing in these other people that have already totaled their elite. I was one of them, and I didn't,
Mhm.
even
took
though
you
I
a while to
wanted to
buy
do,
in.
it took me a while to buy in. Now you're bringing in people that were better than me, right? I mean, I'm just at my elite total, it's
Sure.
not like I'm breaking world records or anything. Now you're bringing in people that have been national titles, all-time world records, all these other things. And it's a different cultivation.
Yeah.
It's just it's different, and it wasn't a bad thing, right? Because you guys went on to lift bigger weights, so I can't sit here and say that's a bad thing
Sure.
because the board's way stronger, everybody was way stronger.
Sure.
So it's, in a way, it's a good thing because maybe there was a little bit more pushback to say I don't need to do this and miss it 13 times and hopefully get it on the 14th.
Right. Right.
And
Still some of that went on. But
Yeah, I'm sure.
I think the big thing is like, I just kept learning as I kept getting there, and some of that got in the way.
Yeah.
I kept digging around. I had the same books Louis had, but I was reading them with a master's level of biomechanics versus barely graduating high school. And that could get in the way a little bit because I was like, well, no, Verkhoshansky's saying this, or Zatsiorski's saying this, or I just got off the phone with Kramer and he's saying this, and Louis didn't want to be challenged.
No, I can see that.
I
can see that.
And I was just like, I'm not trying to challenge you. I'm just trying to make everybody better. And sometimes that was one and the same.
Yeah. If we had something that we wanted to try, it became this strategic game of how do we make it his idea?
Mm-hmm.
Or this was the odd thing, or how do we tell somebody that doesn't train here that Louis speaks to? Because for some reason he would listen to ideas from somebody on a phone or, a different competitor to meet.
But in person,
not us.
Right.
So it's like, how can we take this? It would just became this game.
Molding situation of changing it into his idea.
Trying to implement it in. And if somebody went against the grain, Chuck tried, Kenny tried, some people tried, then the consequences were you're no longer here.
Sure.
So you kind of learn real quick.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
You got to figure out some other way.
Well, that's where I probably made the mistake because I was so looking for his approval.
Yeah.
To find new things that he may not have seen, that what I didn't realize was I was stepping on toes that I was breaking and not realizing.
Yeah.
That was probably my biggest problem with the whole situation was I was reading stuff and then really calculating it in my head, then would come in and experiment with it in training because I saw it in a book and I thought, well, Louis has this book. So if I'm doing it the way these guys are saying, I'm kind of following him indirectly. But in reality, that wasn't what it was.
Yeah, one of the earlier ones, and it was interesting to see resurface several times over the years is I'm going through those Russian manuals, which were a nightmare. The fucking nightmare to try to go through, to try to understand. I see this reoccurring thing where what we're actually doing is concurrent, conjugates, just kind of the changing of the movements.
Sure.
And that was one of the things that, at first, if you read Louis' old stuff, he does note that.
Yeah.
He does note it, but then it changed. And I don't know if he changed it. I'm going to say he didn't change it. The audience did. The people that were reading it. And so it became redefined. The conjugate then became this structure, which is really concurrent. But it became umbrellaed as conjugate to where it's almost like Kleenex today, right? Where I can say today that what that is. It's interesting because when I have conversations with people about programming, I have to ask them how they define that, right? Because some will still define it as what it really is, the rotation of these exercises.
The one big thing I think without digging through 100 of those books and realizing is that what you notice is that there is a mean percentage that the workout should follow, which is about 72 to 74%. So if we break that into RPE scale to make sure that the match is very similar, if your winning warm-up is 4 RPE and your main lift is a 9, whether it's heavy or fast, it's still high intent. And then your accessories are no failure, which I would consider an 8.5 doing on those sets. You average all them in, you're at 75% or 7.5 RPE. And so that's when I knew I was onto something with the warm-ups, was like it was making that average balance come in to play with every book, like Isrin, Verkhoshansky. You can find it. It says average means like 72, 74%. And I was like right there.
When did you find that?
Probably like 6 or 8 years ago. I think right when I was starting to hit the raw numbers, I started realizing like I first started experimenting with warm-ups. I hit the 600-pound raw bench with no winning warm-ups. 2013, I go do my first full raw meet, no knee sleeves, squat like 775 right there in like Eaton. And I hit the third highest total of all time. Well, when I did that, I got to the bench press and I should have hit 615 that day. And I grinded out as 589 or something. And I'm thinking, what the hell? Like the squat knocked me down that bad. And so I'm driving home and the first thing I'm thinking is, I need to get stronger. But I had just gotten back from Australia where this lady was talking about potentiation movements. And she was talking about this sets of 25 and they would do it in these weaker muscle groups. And then the guys' performances would go up, not in powerlifting, in rugby. And I'm thinking, well, fuck, I've never done anything like that before. Maybe I should do a little bit of like pre-fatigue was my first mindset. I need to pre-fatigue the bench press. So when I get to the bench press after the squat in a competition, I'm used to being tired.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked. I hit 606, pow, the highest subtotal of all time under 300 pounds. And so I go back to the drawing board and make it better for 2015. Barely missed like a 915 raw squat in 2015. And my bench is right there. I'm pulling like 795. And so I dial everything into 17. And that's when I really understood the warm-ups and started really plugging them in. But I kept opening up those books about once a year and I'd see this mean percentage of like 72 to 74%. And when I added in the warm-ups at 4 RPE, it came out perfect. It was absolutely perfect. And I was thinking, there's got to be something to this because the numbers kept going up and up and up. And I was at an age where the numbers should have been going down, but they weren't. And so I was missing a key part of the puzzle. And I was also thinking about my training in a ligament and tendon adaptation more so than a muscular adaptation. I was like, what's going to hold me together? Not what's going to make me bigger or stronger, which is the two things people come to us for. But what they don't realize is what attaches the muscle is what makes you able to do that.
Well, I remember when you told me that because I had this holy fuck moment because there's a time period where I was communicating a lot with Sif, and in super training, there's kind of a sample log, like how you should lay the log out. And basically it's each training day and you're breaking each training day by here's a 90% block, here's 80% block, 70%, 60% block. And I'm figuring out the fucking workload volume, all this of each one of these,
breaking it down
all the time. And then at the bottom was like whatever the average was. And questions I had to him, like, how the fuck do I calculate a glute ham raise? How do I calculate a sled? Like, what's the weight, right? Because yes, it's my body weight, but is it really? Because like half of it doesn't move. So is it like half my body weight? And putting that all in there, and the numbers would always come up low. And I'm like, this isn't high enough to get strong. I'm like, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but here's where you might have screwed up is I can't remember if it's Isrin's book or if it's Mevdiev, but the minimal effective percentage dosage is 40%. That's why the Wenning Warmups are at 4 RPE, is because that is the minimal amount you can do to make you better.
Well, here's the fucked up part. The part that was pulling it down into like that 70, sometimes 65% range. Was the sled drags, the glute hams, because the volume was so high.
Extra.
So I'm like, fuck that. I'm getting these out of here because this isn't in my, the strength range of 80, 90%. I'm like fucking getting rid of those things. And then, to be able to pull that back up. And then when you said that, I'm like, motherfucker, that wasn't, it was right there.
Yeah, it was an accumulation of all that
stuff, the waiting around sets is what I call it.
Without that stuff, your mean percentage might have been too high.
Yes.
So you were overtraining.
Yes.
But if you could have calculated all of that and come down to a mean of like 74%, you would have been right in the ballpark, especially if you could get it done in the time parameter.
Oh yeah.
Like an hour.
Yes, and it was towards my final years to where I pulled that out, and it's also during the time where nothing went anywhere, right? And I'm like, motherfucker, like it was right there, but my dogmatic brain is thinking 80% for fives. That's strength range.
The mental bell went off, but too late.
Yes, after you said it later, I'm like, motherfucker, because I just saw that as like warm up shit. I called it wait around shit. Yeah. Like you're waiting to squat, so you do some glute ham raises, you pull down abs, you drag the sled, and then it's your time to go. You go. So I'm like, fuck it, I'm not doing that.
But you never accumulated the volume on it to see if it was matching that percentage mean time.
I didn't know.
But
right?
that's the only one consistent I've seen in all of those books is they show this average percentage of the workout should be 72 to 74%. And I was fucking on it. I figured it out without seeing it. And then it was that aha moment when I was writing the book, and I had already seen that before, but then I started seeing it in every book because I was looking for it.
You see, I would see it, but my brain would always default to they're not working with powerlifters, they're working with Olympic weightlifters, they're working with athletes. And yes, of course, an athlete has to be lower because they're not looking at the power output that we're looking at
Sure.
in the main lifts, or the I guess it would be force more than the power.
Yeah.
Power would be more the Olympic
the
weightlifting
strength output of it. Yeah, the maximal.
Yeah, so they're looking at something different than what we're looking at.
In reality, I'd honestly say it needs to be a little less because an Olympic lift at 100% is still fast.
Yes.
Where at 100% power lift is the slowest fucking thing in the world.
Yes.
So in some ways, 100%. For restoration purposes, in some ways you might need to be closer to that 72% than the 75. You know, just to try to make sure you're forcefully increasing recovery. That's becomes the problem, is not what you can do, what you can recover from. And if your baseline average of each workout is around 72, 74%, including Wenning Warmups with the compound movement and the accessories, you're going to be dead nuts for a decade and you're going to get way stronger. And you're not ignoring any particular rep range. Sometimes accessories might take 45 seconds. Other times they might be a blistering set of 6.
Yeah.
They're rotating. And then the main lift always stays the same skeleton, less than 5, ultra explosive or super fucking heavy. And then the warm-ups are all based on ligament, tendon density, blood flow, and then coordination of weak muscle groups. Where's the weak spot? And GPP. And now if you do all of that in a condensed fashion in less than an hour, you got the full grommet of every possible scenario. That's where it just gets so hard to teach people how to understand that. You know what I mean? So
you're always working on something. So what's next?
Well, we just reinvented some of the tricep machine that was the original Nautilus crunch machine that we flipped around, and now we have foot placement pegs on it to where when you do heavy rows for either warm up or accessories, it locks you into the machine. We've been playing with that. We got a couple more adaptations. So the belt squat now can be converted over into a glute bridge. So you don't need to have an actual glute machine. We've created a slight elevated heel for people with ankle mobility issues, if they don't know how to squat or they prefer an Olympic style squat. I actually got that idea from University of Kansas. One of my online coaches, John, he trains a lot of track athletes, and sometimes he wants them in a little bit of an elevated heel just for a variation. So we created basically a clip-in piece that creates an Olympic shoe without having to buy one. Because you got 150 people on a track team.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, maybe you can get them for free, but maybe you can't. So just more modifications of the same shit that we're doing. I had 5 manuals I dropped in November, and then I got 5 new manuals coming out in about May. The book is kind of incognito with Human Kinetics. They're having an employee issue right now with people like either leaving or moving because everything's going so digital.
Yeah.
They're having issues with that. So it's been on the back burner a little bit. We're hoping to have it out in 24. But they don't have editors. So we're almost at a stuck point right now because I said, well, look, it's really fucking close. Why don't we just comb it over, make it perfect, and just release the damn thing? Because the people that want it, they're not going to be using it for academia.
Yeah.
And it maybe smart guys would, but the point being is like, it's good enough. It's got probably close to 1,100 references. It's laid out really, really well. They're just so picky with how they want things perfect, which I like. But then there's a certain point where like, okay, you've had the book for a year. Let's get on it. You know what I mean? So now I'm writing a book, all the crazy stories at the gyms, just something fun to write, you know, that doesn't have as much science into it. So I want to maybe come out with that book in the next year or two. I've got about 100 pages of it done. Just stupid shit at the gym, you know, with different training partners and like stories, you know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, really, other than that, and just I was on the news last week with the fire department. So we got a couple other fire departments reaching out, kind of feeling out what the cost ratios are. I got one that's all the way up in Bellefontaine. So I don't know how I'm going to reach them because that's an hour and a half from my house. But yeah, just expanding and trying to hold on as tight as I can.
That's great. Is your Instagram the best way to see what's going on?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, the Instagram, I post on it a couple of times a day. We give little like educational feedbacks on the exercises and stuff. A lot of that shit is switched over to Patreon just because it's easy for me to put that on that wall and it's permanent. And like, you get people on there that really want to interact with it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas I don't know who's interacting with Instagram. It's kind of one of those things. It's like a cowboy.
Well, after a couple weeks too, I don't know how many people are going to scroll back on anything
Right.
either.
Yeah. So that stuff's a little bit more permanent. But yeah, I mean, Instagram is probably where you're going to see most of the business stuff. And plus the Winning Strength Instagram channel,
Mhm.
which my media team runs, they do a lot of interactive stuff on that as well. But the website, you know, we're getting 30,000 people hit it a month. So with a pretty good sales rate. So it's nice to see on that because you got guys like Stone Cold Steve Austin with a video telling you why he trains with me, and Don Saladino and people that's lost weight. You know, it's just a little bit more interactive. So we're going to try to get it where when you go on the website, you almost run into a questionnaire. Like, what are you here for? Manuals, coaching. So then you can click on it and it directs you, because we're almost getting so many products now that unless you're pretty savvy, it's you bury a lot of shit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's hard to
You
find.
got 20 times the amount of shit on your website. So
Yes.
but yeah, just that kind of stuff, making things a little bit more navigatable, you know. But other than that, pretty much the same shit.
All right. Well, thanks for coming out again. It's great to have you
man.
out. We'll always have you back out again.
Anytime.
And there's always shit to talk about.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's good seeing you.
All right,
And
dude.
guys, we're done.
Later.
Hey guys, real quick, we realized that something ridiculous, like 80% of the people that watch the podcast don't subscribe. So subscribe to the channel and make sure to check out the description for more details on the guest, you know, links to their pages, and give us a few days, but the show notes will be there. Or not the show notes, the timestamps. Hey, we're just rolling with this thing right now. All right, guys, we got new limited edition apparel. There's 2 designs, as with all the limited edition apparel. It's only while supplies last. This is the blue illusion tee, so I guess you can act like you're stronger than you really are. It's an illusion. And the other one, work harder, not lazier. Or you could just work really, really hard at being lazy. Doesn't matter to me. All that matters to me is that you support the podcast. So hit the link in the description or go to elitefts.com, and on the homepage, scroll down. You're going to see limited edition apparel. Click on there. Pick up your limited edition apparel today. Help support the podcast. Thank you. All right, guys, if you like the Table Talk podcast, then you're going to love the crew. If you're struggling with trying to get through a sticking point, you're trying to figure some specific aspect of your training out that you just can't dial in, you're dealing with injuries, you're trying to figure out how to better optimize your training, all the stuff you're seeing on social media is confusing, and all you need is a little guidance and support, or just somebody to look at your lifts to make sure that they're either heading in the right direction, or if there's a weak point in the lift, they can point out what that weak point is. Well, that's what we have the crew for. So when you join the crew, you get an extra Table Talk podcast each month called the Crewcast. You also get access to our Discord community, which has a training Q&A, form checks with top coaches, mindset section, nutrition, training logs, programs, over 30 ebooks, plus exclusive ebooks just for the crew, webinars, lectures, seminars, giveaways from ranging from full strength equipment. We've given away many yoke bars this year. We've given away actually pieces of strength equipment as well as accessory items, and you get exclusive crew discounts. So go to the link in the description that says join the crew, click it, join now, and start getting stronger today.